to the September 15th edition of the Truckee Planning Commission. We'll call this meeting to order. Can I have a roll call, please?
Chair Gove.
Present.
Vice Chair Tarnay.
Present.
Commissioner Freeman.
Present.
Commissioner Miller.
Present.
Commissioner Hall is absent.
Okay, I would like invite everybody to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so let's go ahead and start with public comment. For those of you that are joining us at home, you can call and leave a voicemail at 530-428-6555 on any item that is not on the agenda at this point, or you can email planningdepartment@townoftruckee.com for public comment on any item that is not on the agenda. Carissa, do we hear any public comment?
Before tonight's meeting, an email from the Truckee Green Team was shared with the commissioners, and I have voicemails, but they all look to be for item 6.1.
Okay, so hearing no other public comment on anything that is not on the agenda, we'll close public comment and move into item number 5, which is approval of minutes. Starting with 5.1, approval of the July 21, 2020 regular meeting minutes.
I move that we approve the meeting minutes from July 2020. Sorry.
There was one item on those I brought up last time. There was mention of a public comment that was read aloud, but actually wasn't. And unfortunately, the whole section didn't have audio in the recording that was online. So I would add a motion to support or second after that mention of public comment being read was removed.
Okay, so I'm sorry, you spoke a little fast at the end there.
I'm sorry, I don't know what this means for procedure, but I would like to remove mention of public comment being read at the beginning of the minutes in that document, because at that meeting, they actually weren't read out loud.
Okay, gotcha.
So if Vice Chair Tarnay would like to amend her motion to include that amendment, then we can have a second on that motion.
Yes, can I just say, I would like to amend my motion to say that.
Seconded.
Okay, all in favor?
Yes, aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, moving on to 5.2, August 18th, 2020 regular meeting minutes.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so we'll now move on to 6.1, Development Code Update, bicycle, parking and support at facilities, secondary residential units, residential accessory uses, planned developments, and cleanup amendments. At this point, we will open public comment for this agenda item. And again, if you're joining us at home or on the go, you can email planningdepartment@townoftruckee.com or call at 530-428-6555. Carissa, do we have public comments to listen to on this one?
I think you want to hear the item first.
I stand corrected. Thank you very much for that that procedural point. I guess I did need the cheat sheet.
We're here to help, Chair.
Okay, Yumi, take it away.
It's actually a team effort, so the first part will be for Laura.
And before we get started, I just wanted to add that Yumi and I are doing the presentation, but Jamie LaChance worked on the accessory dwelling unit section, and Emily McGuire, one of our development services technicians, did several of the updates, her first participation in a development code update. So that was exciting. Okay, Yumi. Quick overview, there were four discussion items tonight: secondary residential units, residential accessory structures, bike parking, and planned developments, and then we had a number of cleanup items. So we'll go through these pretty quickly, and then if you have any questions at the end, we can always come back to any of the slides. Secondary residential units, otherwise known as accessory dwelling units or ADUs. You probably remember in December 2019, the council adopted an urgency ordinance that implemented new state legislation for ADUs. That went into effect on January 1, 2020. And since then, we've been working with HCD to audit the new code section that we adopted and clarify the requirements for ADUs to ensure our ongoing compliance with the state law. In addition to clarifications regarding the law, we also propose some standards that are specific to Truckee that address our local environmental conditions and life safety issues. And we reorganized the ADU section to make it a little more user-friendly based on feedback we've gotten since adoption and to facilitate our public outreach efforts to encourage construction of ADUs. The state clarifications include using the accessory dwelling unit reference instead of secondary residential units, remove the optional allowance for attached units up to 50% the size of the main dwelling, and apply the standard size allowance of 850 square feet for studio and one-bedroom units and 1,000 square feet for units that have 2 bedrooms and more, and add an allowance for 1,200 square foot units on parcels of 1 acre or more. And there was a requirement for ADUs to be within 100 feet of the primary dwelling. We clarified that there is an exemption for that if the director finds that that's not feasible and would preclude construction of the ADU. We allowed a shared mudroom based on conversations with HCD to provide the required exterior access and required the unit to be separate from the main residence. And also clarified that the long-term rental is defined as 31 days or longer. The local standards that were proposed restricted parking within snow storage easements. That was based on life safety concerns with our snow removal operations and requiring parking to be 5 feet from side property lines. That's consistent with our other town standards for parking. Clarify that no architectural features can project into the reduced 4-foot side and rear yard setback. That's also a life safety issue related to snow shed. And we provided roof material and design standards for structures within setbacks. We also originally proposed language that would clarify when short-term rental of ADUs is prohibited. Based on the state legislation, that would be January 1, 2020, anything constructed after that. But we've since learned that direction would be inconsistent with the short-term rental regulations that are going to council on September 22nd, which propose to prohibit short-term rental of any ADU. So tonight we're recommending that we not change that language because we think that would be contradictory and confusing if we were to change it in the code and then have council next week move forward with those restrictions. We received 2 public comments before the meeting. One was Nancy Beckert. She owns an accessory dwelling unit and had concerns about prohibiting short-term rentals. And Kat submitted a comment that requested continuation of the Development Code Amendment item to October. That was requested to allow them additional time to review the proposed changes. So our recommendation tonight is to approve the proposed amendments, and that would include the revised short-term rental language that we proposed. Second item is residential accessory units and uses and structures. We currently have some size allowances for large residential accessory structures that could include barns, detached garages, shops. And there's also a current provision in the code that allows any structure to exceed those size limits with a minor use permit. And that doesn't establish any maximum size for these structures. So what we've found in the past few years is a number of property owners requesting the size to exceed the standard sizes in the code. And that's created concerns with neighboring property owners about neighborhood compatibility, the potential future conversion of the structures for commercial uses, and raised questions about whether the structures are actually accessory if they're significantly larger than the main residence. So what we're proposing is to establish maximum size limits for detached garages based on parcel sizes, require additional setbacks for detached garages on large acreage parcels, since those would be allowed larger structures based on the parcel size, remove the minor use permit allowance to exceed the size limits established in the code. And there were some clarifications for the way that the floor area for accessory dwelling units and detached living areas is exempted from the overall square footage, and to clarify that accessory dwelling units and detached living areas are both allowed, but not within the same detached structure. And additionally, we added a footnote to clarify that the open-air agricultural structures, so that would be a corral or stable or something that doesn't have walls or a roof, is not subject to the size limits. So we recommend that the commission approve the proposed amendments to that code section. And then Yumi's going to take over now.
And then the third discussion item was for bicycle parking. So this came out of some discussion that the Planning Commission had with our most recent affordable housing project. So we thought it was responsive to some concerns that you may have had. The Development Code currently provides standards for the provision of bicycle parking facilities in conjunction with non-residential and multifamily residential projects. Current bicycle parking requirements apply a standard bicycle parking requirement based upon 5% of the vehicle parking demand to any project type. So the current standards, we think, may not provide adequate bicycle parking for varied land uses. So the proposed changes include adopting bicycle parking requirements based upon specific land uses, adopting a more robust bicycle parking requirement for multifamily residential projects, and then creating specific guidelines for long-term bicycle parking spaces for multifamily projects. So we don't have to go into this chart in detail. It's in your staff report, but this is the table we're proposing based off of use. And this table was taken directly out of the rail yard master plan, which was created by a local or by a planning consultant in conjunction with the town. And then just to give you some context about how this bicycle parking relates to our current bicycle parking requirements, Emily put together this chart that shows a hypothetical 68-unit multifamily housing project and how the requirements would compare. So under our current requirements, 5 parking spaces would be required based off of the vehicle parking demand. Under this proposed bicycle parking table, 10 short-term parking spaces would be required, but 30 long-term bicycle parking spaces would be required. So that would be a substantial increase. Oh, no, that was right. And then for a non-residential project, for a restaurant, she used a 5,300 square foot restaurant, which is approximately what Moody's is. And she took a look at the current parking demand, the current bike parking demand, which is based off of patron area, service area, and outdoor dining area. And she found that the short-term bike parking requirement, or the bicycle parking requirement now is 3 and would continue to be 3 under the new proposed language. So we're recommending approval of the proposed amendments for the bicycle parking section. Additionally, in response to some discussion about plan developments in previous Planning Commission review items, as you know, plan development is intended to allow consideration of innovation in site planning and other aspects of project design and more effective design responses to site features, land uses on adjoining properties, and environmental impacts that then development standards of the underlying zone would produce without adjustment. So the current plan development has a requirement for a project mandatory feature. So the applicant can choose one of 4, and those 4 are either the project has to create or provide 25% of the residential units as affordable housing units. The project would achieve greater energy efficiency similar to LEED Silver. The project will achieve minimum of 30% greater efficiency than the minimum requirements for Cal Green, or the project could provide a substantial public amenity. So that would, one of these project mandatory features would be required to get your foot in the door to even have a plan development be considered. So today, the staff is recommending, based off of some discussion with Planning Commission and internal discussions about this process, removing the LEED Silver requirement or allowance for the mandatory feature, since it is, you have been told that that's a fairly easy standard to reach with our Cal Green requirements. Remove the 30% greater energy efficiency of Cal Green, since we've heard that that's pretty impossible to achieve with the standards that we have. And we're proposing to add new language to identify that housing units affordable to very low and low-income households are intended to be rental units, and housing units affordable to moderate-income households are intended to be for-sale products, which is consistent with our inclusionary housing requirements. And we're also proposing a change which is not in your staff report, but is a new change that staff is proposing to change the affordable housing percentage to 30%. So it would actually be a substantial change beyond the 15% that's already required for inclusionary housing. So that's something to consider today. That was not originally in your staff report. The current standard is 25%, so it's 5% more, but it is twice the amount of the inclusionary housing requirement. Additionally, there's one consideration based off a planning commissioner comment we've received. Staff was considering whether or not 100% this should only be applied to projects that are fully residential projects, or if it should be a mixed-use project. So that's something to consider right now. We're proposing that it's for a fully residential project. And then we're proposing to add an option for the provision of affordable housing units for non-residential projects. So we'd clarify that a mixed-use project could provide 25% of their floor area of non-residential use as an affordable housing project to meet this mandatory project feature requirement. And then we've also added broader language to the public amenities item to allow on-site and off-site improvements that provide a public benefit. So the purpose of these proposed changes is to take out features that do not provide an actual benefit to the community, create a higher standard, and allow for more discretion in considering features by the Planning Commission. We've also identified that there are some other challenges with the plan development process, and we should probably have a larger community discussion as we move forward, but that's not necessarily up for discussion. We're not proposing to have that discussion today, but if we wanted to in the future, we could discuss creating parameters for the future type of flexibility we'd want in plan developments, creating proportionate public benefits based on the requested flexibility. Potentially, we could do some community outreach to find out if there's a menu of desired features that our community wants that we can incorporate for consideration. Incorporate sustainability options with a future adopted climate action plan, and then create better criteria or findings to identify what exactly a superior project is. So today we're recommending approving the proposed amendments for the plan development with the proposed changes that I'm showing today, and we could discuss them further if you desire. So now we'll move on to our plethora of cleanup items, and I'll turn it back over to Laura.
Okay, so the first item is a couple of definitions. Right now, our kitchen and cooking facility definition talks about what kinds of cooking facilities are allowed outside a kitchen, but we've had questions from community members who want to know what actually is required for something to be considered a kitchen. So we added some language that identifies that you would need cooking facilities, a refrigerator of some size, and a sink. And then we also added a limitation on the number of bar sinks allowed outside of kitchens to 1 per residential unit. That was based on some issues we've had with a number of different bar sinks being used throughout units that are potentially going to be illegally converted to separate living area. So we felt that limiting that to 1 per unit would take care of that problem. We don't currently have a definition for a carport, but the term is referenced in several of our other definitions. So we recommend adding a definition. Basically just says a carport's an automobile shelter that's open on at least 2 sides, and that's consistent with direction from the chief building official. Fences and retaining walls. We added language that clarifies that the exemptions for residential fences apply to fences on parcels that have an established land use. So for a residential parcel, that would be existing residence. And we don't have a current height limit for retaining walls, although we do have maximum heights for other types of walls and fences. So to be consistent with that, we are proposing a 6-foot maximum height. And that if someone wants to exceed that, that could be approved through a variance if all of the hillside development standards are met. We added some language to clarify the sewer requirements to make it clear that new commercial uses need to have access to on-site restrooms that are connected to the sewer system. The existing language is a little bit vague on that, and that portable toilets can be used on residential or commercial parcels when there's construction with an active building permit. The property maintenance section talks about how you can use camper, boat, trailer, some kind of vehicle as a temporary or permanent living space for up to 2 weeks. We wanted to make it clear that that use is allowed if it's a parcel with an established land use. Our outdoor seating section, this came up with another community member recently. Our current code states that your number of outdoor seats can't exceed your number of indoor seats, but with COVID, what we found is a lot of restaurants trying to figure out how to operate with primarily outdoor uses and including some entirely outdoor restaurant concepts. So we added a director exception to that requirement that would allow only outdoor seating for restaurants. Live work units, something that's in the code. It's allowed in a number of zoning districts downtown. We've noticed that live-work units are allowed, but work-live units aren't allowed. So we're proposing to allow those in the same zoning districts with the same permit requirements.
And now it's me. So for grading and vegetation removal, that section seeks to prevent premature grading of terrain before building permits are ready to be issued and acted upon. There's a section that allows for an exemption for those who get a timber harvesting plan issued by CAL FIRE, which is essentially a permit that a homeowner or any property owner can get for any vacant land or developed land to cut down their trees and sell them for profit, since they are considered real property. That's kind of, we would like to remove that exception, not necessarily to avoid allowing them to get money for their trees, but to ensure that there is a building permit that would allow for the removal of the trees to ensure that a vacant property isn't necessarily raised and then walked away from without actual development on the property. So that's why that language is being removed. There is still the option for an applicant to come in for a zoning clearance if they did want to remove trees without an actual land use permit or development permit for that project. It's also created some sort of circular review process where CAL FIRE has come to the town to ask for approval for the timber harvesting plan. But we can't actually approve removal of trees until the timber harvesting plan is approved. So it's kind of created a circular review process that we wanted to get out of and kind of just separate them as two different land use entitlements or review processes that an applicant would have to go through. We are proposing to remove language stating that the director may approve a height exception up to an additional height of 10 feet and up to a maximum of 10% of the height limit for single-family dwellings in a residential zoning district. And this is primarily just to remove a conflict that appears elsewhere in the code and to be consistent with that to the same code section. Additionally, we're proposing to change some language or change some numbers around for the hillside development standards, which the purpose of that section is to ensure conscientious development on sites with slopes. The current language says that slopes 2-to-1, vertical to horizontal, require director approval based on a soils report and stabilization study. That slope is actually pretty steep. It's about 60 degrees, as you can see on the right. So in talking to our engineering division, they thought that perhaps a 1-to-2 vertical to horizontal would be a more appropriate slope to have that threshold be triggered. So we're proposing to change it to a 1-to-2 vertical to horizontal and only requiring technical studies if the director deems necessary. Additionally, we're updating the Donner Lake development standards to update the high water line, which is based on a recent lawsuit settlement between Donner Lake property owners and the State Lands Commission. So we're essentially changing the number from 5939 under another datum to 5935.7 feet under a different datum, which is actually a 4-foot difference. So the high water line is actually changing 4 feet. We're also updating the definitions for FAR, lot area, and mean sea level, which reference the high water line. And really, we don't have much say in what the high water line is and just what State Lands Commission says. Additionally, we're proposing to require projects near floodplains to submit information regarding that floodplain, floodways, and base flood elevations, requiring them to provide information from a registered professional authorized to assess waterways, along with a hydrology report. Right now, the language says from a registered engineer, but registered engineers are not necessarily hydrologists or waterway experts. So we're changing that to be more clear. Additionally, we're proposing a new sign community banner sign location at the Rayleighs, if the property owner so wishes to install one. We're proposing to clarify language of the use of synthetic materials. We're allowing minimal use of synthetic materials for lettering of a cabinet sign. Before, we didn't allow for any synthetic materials, so we're being a little more relaxed there. We're just clarifying that A-frame signs are allowed as a temporary sign, since right now it says it's prohibited outright, which is not the intent. We're proposing to require warmer sign lighting colors, so 3,000 Kelvin or less, based off of some direction from our HPAC. We're proposing to clarify that the location of wall signs should be close to a customer entrance. And then we're proposing to prohibit linear LED lights for signs to avoid overlighting. Additionally, we're proposing to allow raising and keeping of backyard chickens within the DMU zoning district in association with a single-family residential parcel, which is consistent with all other single-family zones that allow for homes, single-family homes. Any project with a multifamily residence would require a minor use permit to check for compatibility with that use. We're also proposing to remove an allowance for rental of a detached living areas for bed and breakfast inns, which is consistent with the detached living areas section, which outright prohibits rental of those types of spaces. And then for food trucks, we're changing the definition to allow for food trucks in any location for 6 hours, which is consistent with another location of our code, which also says 6 hours. And then to clarify that one food truck is allowed at a business or shopping center at one time, and require that the food truck be on a parcel with an established non-residential use and on a paved surface. And then additionally, based off of some recommendations by our town attorney, we are proposing to clarify in our appeal section who exactly can appeal. So right now the language states that the community development director and zoning administrator decisions can be appealed by any person, whereas a decision made by your planning commission would only be made by somebody who has given verbal or written testimony at the hearing. So they submitted a comment before the meeting, or they provided verbal comment at the meeting. It also requires that a member of the commission or council that files an appeal cannot participate in the consideration of the project, and then requires appeal review to be de novo, which means that's brand new review. The new reviewing body doesn't take into account what the previous reviewing body has said. And we have received some public comments on this particular item. Nikki Riley is concerned about limiting appeals of decisions to those who have made public comment, and asked the commission to consider allowing potential appellants to submit evidence of their inability to provide comments in a timely manner in order to allow them to provide an appeal. And then Mike Wolf has similar concerns, where he's concerned about limiting appeals for decisions to those who have made public comment. I believe the last remaining item for cleanups is the workforce housing requirement. The substance of this section hasn't changed. We're just proposing to clarify that there's actually two components that need to be added to any deed restriction for the workforce housing ordinance. And that would be first, that there's employees of that particular business has first right of refusal. And so the second tier, if that cannot be fulfilled, the owner would then have to rent it to somebody who's based on affordability requirements. So I am proposing today some clarifying language, since it was a little confusing, since there were 3 bullet points when I said two components or 2 items. So I'm clarifying what that means. So I'm saying that the workforce housing unit shall be deed restricted to require 2 components, and I've listed out those 2 components that need to be listed on the deed restriction. So if you do want to move forward, Planning Commission or staff is recommending approval of the proposed cleanup amendments with those changes that are identified in this presentation by staff. So tonight, staff is recommending adoption of Resolution 2020-17, recommending approval to the Town Council, the 2020 Development Code amendments, and recommending that the projects be exempt from CEQA pursuant to Section 15061B3, with amendments proposed in this presentation. And we did note that there were a couple minor typos that were identified by Vice Chair Tarnay that we'll incorporate moving forward. And if we do move forward with this item, and we do talk about development code updates next, we'll be talking about objective design standards for ADUs. So we're here for any questions.
Thank you very much. We will now listen to public comment. So those of you joining us at home or on the go with your mobile device, you can email planningdepartment@townoftruckee.com or send a voicemail or text message to 530-428-6555. Carissa, can you play us those voicemails?
Yes, I will note that emails were received before tonight's meeting were shared with all of the commissioners and added to the public record. Most recently, just to clarify with commissioners, an email from the Contractors Association of Truckee Tahoe was emailed to all of you shortly before the meeting started, and I will now play voicemails.
Ruth Jackson Hall, Truckee resident. I'm calling in regards to today's agenda item 6.1, Development Code Update. Dear Planning Commission, I was just notified that you will be considering an amendment to the Development Code regarding the appeals process. Although I had read the agenda item description a few days ago, it was not clear to me from the examples given, such as bicycle parking and secondary residential units, that an important public process, the appeals process, would also be under review. Additionally, it was stated that the purpose for these amendments is for town codes to be in compliance with the state. I take responsibility for not reading the 137-page report, but the way I read the agenda, it seemed to be a pro forma exercise in aligning town code to the state. So regarding the amendment appeals process, I have a couple questions. Is the town's appeals process out of compliance with the state? Is there a legal reason to make this change? If neither is the case, I am not in favor of restricting the appeal process so that there is only one chance to enter opposition, that is, when the item is initially reviewed. New issues may come up later that warrant a response. People should have a second chance to enter the process if they were not unable to participate the first time. Also, a 5-day window from receiving the agenda to responding is not enough time for community engagement. Perhaps an earlier notice that outlines agenda topics without the full report would get the topic on the community radar. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Next voicemail.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Pat Davison. I'm the Government Affairs Manager for the Contractors Association of Truckee Tahoe. Thank you for this opportunity to share some thoughts on Agenda Item 6.1, Proposed Changes to the Development Code. CAT respectfully requests that this agenda item be continued to the October 20th Commission meeting. This request is based on the short window of time to review the 4 discussion items plus the 19 cleanup items in the agenda packet. Some of the topics have multiple subtopics, as you will see. In the future, please think seriously about using virtual workshops to introduce code changes or other issues, maybe a month before adoption or action by the Commission. Having more time to hear staff reasoning or input from others is valuable and also opens up the topic for two-way dialogue. The end goal should be to take our time and do it right. The one topic we tried to focus on, ADUs, generated numerous questions and concerns. There were 6 problem areas where we think more time would be helpful to eliminate confusion and add clarity or flexibility. Those 6 areas are the proximity language about the 100-foot distance and the change from previous code. The next problem area is deviations for smaller ADUs. We want to understand what the proposed language means and also offer alternatives if we think there's a problem. The third area would be restricted interior access. We'd like to see language added about a locked door. The fourth change would be parking location. We're not sure if the criteria is reasonable or not, need more time to look at that. The fifth is shared driveway. Again, need to have a little more time to understand the implications. And the last problem area is the junior accessory dwelling unit cooking facilities. Definitely need more explanation. There seems to be some confusion or contradictory language here. Lastly, earlier today we were informed by town staff that a total ban on ADU use for short-term rentals is being proposed. Out of respect to those owners, we request that no decision on a total ban be made tonight by the Commission or next week by the Council until ADU owners have been notified and given a chance to provide comment. Following the Truckee way, we subscribe to the practice of no surprises and giving all stakeholders a chance to be heard. If you were an ADU owner, wouldn't you want some advance notification before a decision is made? I want to close by thanking town staff for answering questions from our members on Friday and for the heads-up phone call today about the ADU ban. We hope you can agree that a continuance to October 20th makes sense.
That cut off after 3 minutes, and I have one more voicemail.
Hello, my name is Sarah Green. I'm a Truckee resident. I would like to comment on agenda item 6.1 in tonight's Planning Commission meeting in regards to the proposed changes to the appeals process. I specifically oppose the proposed change requiring appeals to only come from individuals who commented at a public hearing. First, the fact that meeting materials are made available only 5 days prior to a meeting presents a problem for the average citizen. This is not a sufficient amount of time for people to review the materials and provide meaningful feedback. Many people don't even hear about what's going on in Truckee until after a public meeting has been held and the decision has been made. And I believe this is in part due to the short time frame that materials are available. I would encourage the town of Truckee to have meeting materials available much sooner, allowing the public sufficient time to review and comment if desired. Second, any individual should be able to appeal a project regardless of whether they commented at the hearing, if their justification is based on a concern voiced during the hearing. It should be more about the basis of the concern rather than the individual who made the comment. Third, there is also the possibility of a new concern arising during board commission deliberation after public comment has closed. This might constitute a significant enough of a concern for project appeal. However, there would not have been an opportunity for a community member to make public comment. We really want to ensure a fair public process. I hope that you will reconsider whether this new clause really makes sense. Thank you for your consideration.
And I will refresh the inbox to confirm if there's any new emails, and there are none. That is all the public comment I've received.
Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comment. Commissioners, since we don't have any applicants before us tonight other than the town, do you guys want to go through this just one item at a time, and that way we can just, yeah, okay. Great, so let's go ahead and jump into the first item, which is the ADUs. And Susie, if you'd like to start with clarifying questions for staff.
Did you ask me? Okay, you were looking the other way.
Ready to go?
Okay. Okay, so on page 13 of the staff report, it talks about how an ADU or a junior ADU may be developed concurrently with a new single-family dwelling. However, final occupancy shall not be issued. And I just want to clarify, this does not affect if someone wants to build like a little tiny house first, live in that while they build their big house, correct?
Correct. In that circumstance, the junior ADU or JADU would be the single-family residence, and then with their single-family permit, they would be coming in with an addition that also converts that initial space to an ADU or the JADU.
Okay, so it wouldn't rule that out as a possibility for people who are building their own homes. Okay. So why is it that we want that detached ADU to be within the 100 feet?
That is a standard that we've had in place since at least 2003, and I'm not sure how long prior to that under Nevada County. However, a good chunk of that is so that we're not creating additional sprawl, that we're kind of keeping things together so that accessory uses are all part of, reading as part of all one property.
Okay, so like that clustering when we cluster those
Exactly,
building envelopes.
and that is specific to Truckee. That is not mandated through state legislation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so for parcels under 1 acre in size, there's some regulations for the gross floor area, 850 square feet if it's a studio, 1 bedroom, or 1,000 square feet for 2 bedrooms. And that's regardless of the main house size. Like my house is only 1,124 square feet, but we could technically build a 1,000 square foot accessory dwelling unit.
Correct.
Okay. And then I just want to make sure. I mean, I don't, yeah, thank you. And then for the other parcels, for the big parcels, if it's 1 acre or more, it can't exceed 1,200 square feet, but that doesn't require it to have more bedrooms?
Correct. Yeah, that 1,200 square feet maximum is regardless of the number of bedrooms in that unit. That has been a standard maximum allowable size on parcels of 1 acre or greater, again, since at least 2003. So we're trying to incorporate that so that we don't end up with a lot of non-conforming ADUs on larger acreage parcels.
Okay, and it doesn't matter, it could be a 1,200 square foot studio. Okay. So this kitchen thing is, I agree, a little bit confusing. The junior ADU is not required to comply with the kitchen or cooking facility regulation. Are they required to have any appliances?
Yeah, the language we have in there is directly from the state legislation. Sorry, I'm trying to get there on my staff report.
I remember seeing something about counter space.
Yes.
And a refrigerator.
So it's on page 20 of the staff report. It has the incorporated language under section or bullet number 7. And it just says a cooking facility with appliances. That is directly from the state legislation. We did request clarification from HCD about what would be incorporated in that. And they said, realistically, it could be a toaster oven and a blender. So there are very minimal standards on that. And we're using that language at least for now.
Great, thank you. Okay, so on page 21, it talks about on a parcel with a primary dwelling unit and a JADU, juniors, only one of the units may be rented as a long-term rental. And I think what we're trying to say there is that the owner has to reside at the property, because when you say only one can be rented as a long-term rental, it makes it sound like one can be rented as a short-term rental.
That's a great question. Yeah, so only one can be rented as long-term. The owner must technically reside in the other unit, whether it's the main dwelling or the ADU, or JADU, excuse me. However, reside can be as a second homeowner. They don't have to live there full-time.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So essentially owner-occupant.
Okay. Oh, and that's it. That's all I have for ADUs. Thank you. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Susie. Ruth?
Sure. I just have a couple questions. On page 8 of the staff report, under maximum floor area, on parcels larger than an acre, the detached accessory garage must be located at least 150 away from the property line. Why now is it spreading things further out as opposed to the other section where it was bringing things closer together?
I think you're talking about the residential accessory structure section,
Yes.
not the ADU section.
Good point.
But if your question is why it's a different distance, This would be as measured from a property line versus the 100-foot standard that Jamie was talking about is from the dwelling to the accessory dwelling.
But why push things further apart? The discussion in the other section was about moving things closer together, and I'm just looking for consistency.
So this one is trying to move things away from the property line, which would theoretically move it closer to any other structures on the property. But it's kind of trying to achieve a different goal than to keep the structures. I mean, I guess it is trying to keep things clustered.
It's also to ensure neighborhood compatibility, to ensure that there's less impact on the adjacent neighbors, and which is the intent of that. Trying to get away from the minor use permit, but still being cognizant of that.
Got it. Apologies for jumping the section. No further questions on the actual section we're talking about.
Dan?
I had some questions on ADUs on multifamily parcels. A couple things here on page 13, section C, item 2. It says, on lots with a multifamily dwelling, up to 2 detached ADUs shall be permitted. And then right after that, it says that the number of converted ADUs permitted shall be 1 unit per multifamily building or up to 25% of the existing unit count, which those 2 sentences contradict each other. Because if you had a 20-unit project, you could have 4 units.
So there are 2 things happening. You get a multifamily parcel gets up to 2 detached ADUs per parcel. And then within a building, you can have converted space, so non-living space, like an attic, a basement, a boiler room, that can be converted to an attached interior ADU, and we're calling those converted ADUs. And you can have up to 25% of the number per building and at least 1. So if you had, say, 3 units in that building, you could still have 1 unit. If you, in the example that we have at the end of that paragraph, we try to explain it a little bit. For example, if a multifamily property with 8 existing units could have 2 detached ADUs and 2 new attached ADUs converted from within the existing non-livable space. And this is all straight from legislation. We are trying to provide more clarity on it. Many jurisdictions aren't sure how to implement that, so it's a tricky section still.
Okay. I think that makes sense. Page 21, it looks like there's a deed restriction on junior ADUs, but not on regular ADUs.
That is correct. Again, the deed restriction is coming straight from state legislation, including what needs to be incorporated into those deed restrictions. It is the direction of our town attorney to not overly require deed restrictions on properties. So therefore, we're following the exact letter of the legislation and applying them to JADUs, but we are not requiring them on standard ADUs because it is not required by legislation.
Okay. We had a question here on the parking on the multifamily ADUs. If you have an old complex, an old multifamily complex that does not meet the current parking standards, and somebody adds ADUs, does the entire property now need to be brought up to current standards, or just meet the ADU requirement?
That's a great question. Give me a minute. Sorry. In general, the ADU legislation does say that if you are permitting a ministerial ADU, you are not required, or they are not required to be brought into conformance with current zoning regulations. So that means, it's my interpretation, and Jenna or Danielle, correct me if you think I'm off here, that means that we would have to allow for those new ADUs or converted ADUs on a multifamily parcel without requiring additional parking.
Okay.
And same goes for single family as well.
Let's note that Danielle is nodding in agreement with that.
That's all I had for ADU questions.
Just a follow-up question to Dan's. I mean, it's probably obviously an obvious question, but just to make it clear, all of these ADUs, they're still subject to coverage on all these lots, right?
So for a standard ADU, you are definitely subject to site coverage, floor area ratio, open space, parking standards. For these smaller ADUs that, let's see, sorry, in the staff report, it describes them as units that are less than 800 square feet or less and less than 16 feet in height. They are not subject to site coverage standards. However, we are recommending that they can only exceed site coverage by the maximum or by the minimum amount needed to create that ADU. So let me find that section. At the bottom of page 14, the very bottom paragraph of the staff report, number 3, or I, if you prefer.
Great, thanks. I mean, there seems to be...
I'm so sorry. I just wanted to correct that. It's actually, in talking about the smaller ADUs, that's actually on page 15, number 2, deviations to standards. Sorry, I was doing a quick look and missed it.
Thank you. And can you speak to the language regarding the short-term rentals of ADUs? Unpack that a little bit.
So the state legislation allows for local jurisdictions to determine whether standard ADUs can be short-term rented. Short-term rentals are for 30 days or less. Long-term rentals are 31 days or more. And so the state legislation tosses that back to local jurisdictions as to whether they want to allow for standard ADUs to be short-term rented. The legislation does outright prohibit short-term rentals of junior ADUs. And so we had recommended in the staff report to restrict short-term rentals for ADUs that were permitted after January 1st, 2020. So if they were pre-existing, we would continue to allow them. Based on the recent direction and the ordinance that will be proposed to Town Council next week, it sounds like that is coming off the table. I think Danielle's going to speak to that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we hadn't better coordinated in our efforts between doing development code amendments and then the group that we have internally working on the short-term rental ordinance. So we were being more conservative sort of in the planning shop, but the group that's working on the short-term rental ordinance consists of every department. And so there was an executive decision based on that process to recommend to council to prohibit all short-term rentals in ADUs, regardless of whether they're existing or when they're coming in. So an idea that we had was the commission is welcome to talk about this topic. We do think that going with the recommendation for short-term rentals makes sense to say, no, they're prohibited regardless of the age. We do know that there are property owners that would be impacted by this, but if the commission has a strong feeling about it, we can forward your recommendation to council for them to consider for their meeting next week on the 22nd, that if you feel strongly one way or the other, we'd like to do that. Really, the reasoning behind the internal group to prohibit them was really based on affordable housing, that the town really looked at ADUs as the opportunity to provide a different type of housing than what we had before, and having those available for long-term rentals made sense versus situations that could arise where someone has an existing single-family home and then they come in and build an ADU for the purpose of creating it for a short-term rental. So there's some conflict there. We apologize for that. It's not clean, but sometimes, we're working fast and we've got different arms kind of doing things, and this is where we've landed. So feel free to talk about it. I just want to provide that context.
Thank you very much. Do we have any data on how many permits were pulled between January 1st and now that have ADUs?
I don't have that number. Do you, by any chance? I know it's not a very high number. I'm very confident it's 20 or less, but I don't have an exact number.
Okay.
Dave, can I ask a quick follow-up question on all that?
Yes, you may.
Awesome. So there are people right now that live in their house that short-term rent a room in their house to help them with mortgage or what have you. That would not be illegal. That is accepted through the B&B regulation, correct?
That's correct.
Yes, you're right.
And it's just, even if they had a kitchenette in there, it's still not illegal for them to do that.
I believe it's only a bedroom that's exempt. If it had a kitchen, it would be an ADU.
Okay, but if it had a bedroom and a hot plate, we don't know, right?
If it met the criteria for a junior ADU, then you couldn't short-term rent that under the state law, which would be some kind of efficiency kitchen with, like you said, a hot plate or microwave or something, but not a full cooking facility.
This is very confusing. Thank you.
Yeah, I will say the state legislation was pretty confusing, and Jamie's done a lot of work trying to make it less confusing for people, so we really appreciate all of her efforts with that.
Okay, let's, we ready to move on to the next item? Okay, and if, let's see, so we're moving into bike storage. Excuse me, residential accessory uses and structures. Thank you. Susie, you want to start again?
Let's let somebody else go first.
Commissioner Miller.
I love getting to follow Commissioner Tornay. My remaining question on this section, thank you for the appetizer in the last round. Can you say more about removing the language around greenhouses? Is it now no longer possible to build much larger ones, or should this be covered by the existing language?
So the current language allows them to be 25% the floor area of the primary dwelling. That was the existing standard. We just took out the minor use permit, which is kind of a little bit of a squishy process. And I would say if you see benefit to having larger ones, we could talk about creating a different standard for the maximum size. That was just what was already in there. And to go back to your previous point about the distance from the property line, I was thinking about it after we talked about that. If you think that there's benefit to making sure that it's clustered with the main dwelling, potentially we could add some language applying the 100-foot requirement that the detached structure needs to be within 100 feet of the dwelling, in addition to being a distance from the property line.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't want to just add more requirements for the sake of adding more requirements, but if that more effectively gets to the intent, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, we could definitely add that.
Thank you. No further questions?
Commissioner Freeman.
I want to touch on that 150 feet from the property line again. If you own a property that is 300 feet by 300 feet wide, that is 90,000 square feet, that's 2 acres. If you are in the very center of that property, you are 150 feet from every property line, which means there's not a single spot in that lot you could build anything. And if you have a house on that, so you start doing the math at how big of a property you would need to build anything that's considered an accessory structure, it becomes a huge property. So certainly nothing that's 1 acre, probably nothing that's 2 acres. You'd be probably in the 5 acre plus range by the time you put a house on it and then your accessory structure away from your house. So I think that isn't a realistic number.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about that if you think a different number makes sense. The standard setback for larger acreage parcels would be 30 feet from the side property line. So if you think a different setback would be appropriate, then we could definitely modify that.
I mean, I would think the 30 feet would be appropriate, but we could do a quick little map and draw some different generic lot sizes and draw a house and a driveway and say, well, if your garage, your detached accessory unit was 20 feet from your house and it was 30 by 30 feet, less than 1,000 square feet, where could you put this? How big of a piece of land would you need? And I think I kind of just ran through some quick numbers. It would prohibit most property owners probably in Truckee from ever being able to build an accessory structure.
Yeah, that's definitely something we can take a look at. I believe the last one of these minor use permits that I did, it was about 150 feet, if I'm remembering correctly, from the adjacent property owners who had significant concerns with the project because it was a very large structure. So that's kind of what we were working with. But if it's not workable for other properties, then we can definitely look at modifying that. And the other thing we could do is, I think currently it applies to anything that's over an acre, but we have different size allowances for between 1 and 5 acres and 5 acres and more. So if we wanted to just apply it to those 5+ acre parcels, we could also do that.
Or put a tiered on maybe the size structure they're talking about building. I mean, if it's 20 by 20 versus 60 by 60.
Yeah, we can definitely modify that if you think a different standard makes sense.
And then I had another question on table 316, just on maximum floor area. Does that count the coverage, or does that count like if you have a 2-story structure?
The floor area would be the area within the walls of the building.
So if it's 500 square feet and it's 2 stories, it's 1,000 square feet?
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I had.
Commissioner Tarnay?
Okay, so I'm a little bit confused about accessory structures versus garages. What if it's not a garage but a workshop for vehicle maintenance? What is the definition of an agricultural accessory structure? What if that structure is for agricultural equipment? Does that then become a garage? So do we have a strict definition between those things, a garage and not a garage?
Yeah, there are separate definitions in the code for those. I do think that it's interesting that the way the code's currently written, it has different standards for a detached garage than it does for other types of residential accessory structures. That's how it's set up currently, and I imagine that is because when they put this code section together, maybe wanted to allow some more flexibility for a detached garage than maybe some of these others, which are subject to the cumulative size limits. But if you don't think it makes sense to have different standards for the detached garage versus something like a workshop, then, we could talk about that.
Okay, is there a quick definition on what is a garage and what is not a garage?
We can pull it up here in the code. So is your interest in seeing the difference between the agricultural accessory structure versus the regular accessory structure?
No, I think the agricultural, I don't know. Okay, this is because of, on page 6, it says establish maximum size limits for detached garages based on parcel sizes. But it's only for detached garages. It's not for other accessory structures, right?
Correct.
So originally we had these based on floor area, and it sort of was a disincentive to build a small home because then you couldn't build as big a garage or accessory structure. I can't remember which, but now it's still the same because those not garages, accessory structures, still are based on the home size, correct? It's still that 30% for a single one or 40% combined.
Right. In the footnotes for the cumulative size table, that's where it talks about how a single structure shouldn't exceed the 30 or 40% the size of the main dwelling for anything except a garage. And then the garage section, how it was written previously had the 1,000 square foot limit, which is we kept for smaller parcels, and it didn't establish a maximum size limit for larger parcels for detached garages. So what we were trying to do is create some different standards for those larger parcels.
Okay, do we have a definition or no? How do you determine if it's an accessory structure or a garage, not an agricultural one? still not there. Okay.
Well, we have a definition for agricultural structures, so.
Well, hit me with that while you're there.
It says, an uninhabited structure for the storage of farm animals, implements, supplies, or products that contains no residential use and is not open to the public. Includes barns, grain elevators, silos, and other similar structures, but not commercial greenhouses, which fall under a different definition, or structures for agricultural processing activities, which also fall under a different definition. It may include coops, corrals, pens, stables, etc., and wind machines. So pretty specific.
Okay, but something that was containing farm implements could look an awful lot like a garage, couldn't it?
That's true. So we kind of have to base it off of what the proposed use of the structure is.
I just find all this cutting things into little bits and pieces and making exceptions for this and that and what is inside it is weird and it's crazy, and it just seems like to me it just seems like we should have accessory structures, and that should include garages and everything else, but I don't know. Yeah, why do we not want that?
I don't think it's not. I don't think it's that we necessarily don't want that. I think that we were going off of what the previous standards were and just trying to make some minor updates. Potentially, we could go back and look at doing a bigger update to that code section that would apply a single standard to multiple types of structures, including detached garages, if the commission thinks that that is a better approach.
I mean, Commissioner Tornay, there's probably some history here that might be helpful too, in that the town was recognizing garages a little bit different than accessory structures, just in that because of our snow, that's more of a necessity, where the other types of structures were maybe not always a requirement for people, that they just weren't on the same sort of playing field. That if you had particularly these larger properties where we wanted to ensure people could have a garage, and if they wanted it detached, there was a standard for that. But then also for situations where people wanted to have agricultural structures like a barn or something else. And this code section works simultaneously with the building code. So if someone comes in and submits something that's a garage, we're working together with the building department with these code definitions to make sure that what's permitted is equally the same under what the building code defines it. And an ag structure and a garage are treated different, they're assessed different, they're identified different on the plans. So that's a tool that we use to help implement that, even though the development code doesn't have a specific definition of garage kind of listed in there. So hopefully that helps.
Okay. So I just, to me, I see establishing the maximum size limits for detached garages based on parcel size. I see why we're doing that, because instead of basing it on your structure and disincentivizing smaller structures. I'm just confused as to why the accessory structures are still based on residence size. So I can move on. I don't really, if anybody else, we can discuss it later. If anybody else can clarify why they're different, that would be great. But okay.
Susie, I'm not sure why that was established in the code. We didn't propose changing what was in the existing table, but if you don't think that those size limits in that footnote make sense, then that's something that we could talk about, whether that should also be modified.
The slicing of things depending on what's inside them, I find to be odd, because somebody can build it as an agricultural accessory building, and they're storing their farm implements in there, and then they sell it, and then it becomes a garage. That's all. I just think it's an odd way to create the regulations on something that is not persistent. That's all. Okay, I'm going to move on. So just for the greenhouses part, for curiosity, does Truckee allow grow greenhouses for cannabis?
I don't believe so. Jenna is shaking her head no.
The town does not allow outdoor cultivation.
It's not, there it is, sorry, I'm new at this. Yeah, outdoor cultivation, there's definite restrictions on it, and there has to be a number of factors involved, and we don't allow any kind of commercial cultivation at all. So it's just for personal use.
Okay, and a greenhouse does not change the consideration to indoor.
Correct. Yeah, it's still considered outdoor. And it's not allowed to be visible, and there's some other restrictions in place.
Okay, and I mean, to me, honestly, it's allowed to be up to 500 square feet, which sounds pretty darn large. So yeah, just curious, but thank you. Okay. Oh, and that was that. I'm going to try and suss through this other stuff here while we're talking, but thank you. I think that's all I have.
Okay, any other questions on residential accessory uses and structures? Moving on to bicycle parking. Commissioner Freeman, do you have any questions about bicycle parking?
I had a question about the long-term bicycle parking, especially as it relates to our discussion last month. Can that be achieved with interior bicycle storage?
Yes.
Or I guess, like, what defines bicycle parking versus bicycle storage? And what does long-term bicycle parking mean?
I think it's probably a fair discussion. I don't think that there is intended to be a difference in terms of the long-term bicycle parking. I think it was just we tried to keep the same semantics of parking. But we can change that if you'd like it to be bicycle storage, or put a slash as a bicycle storage for long-term bicycle parking / storage.
No, I like the thought to create storage or parking for residents versus visitors, basically.
Yes. I mean, that's the distinction that we're trying to make.
That's all I had.
Commissioner Miller?
Thank you for adding a whole section about bike parking based on our last discussion. This is really awesome. I also like the distinction. Would it be possible to define some design constraints around the storage? The example last month had indoor bike parking where people had to bring bicycles upstairs. So if it would be possible to define bike storage or parking or wherever bikes are supposed to go as being something that's level, just to make it a little more accessible.
You mean on the first floor as opposed to on the upper floors?
Or just no stairs?
Just no stairs. That is something we can consider. It could be something of a design constraint for the applicants, but that's something we could look at.
Okay, as long as it's transparent. And then another design question, I've seen both in Truckee and everywhere else, this is definitely not a local problem, those really nice professional serious steel bike racks installed too close to a building to be used to their full capacity. Is it possible to also specify either a minimum distance from some wall or surface, or just some buffer around the bikes? Or I'm sure maybe there's a manual that comes with the bike racks before they get installed, but just to make sure we get the full capacity for the equipment that's being installed.
Yes, we can. We can talk to possibly our engineering division to see what the standard is, if they have one.
Okay, that'd be great. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Tarnay, questions about bicycle parking?
I do. Okay. Well, first of all, the previous minimum was 3, and this new regulation lowers the minimum for both office and restaurant to 2. I would like to keep it at 3. I don't see why we would lower the minimum. So I went through and looked at a bunch of stuff, and this sort of apples to apples comparison that you've shown on the screen here was not in our staff report. And so I found some really odd numbers when I looked through things. What did I find? Let me go on this page. So I find our this new regulation for the hotels to be a little bit, it seems like a lot. There it is. Okay, so for your hotels, it's 1 per 5 rooms. So if you have 100 rooms, that's 20. If you have 200 rooms, that's 40 parking spots. I don't know what the intention is, who's supposed to use those. I feel like the people coming up from the Bay Area with their $5,000 mountain bikes are not going to lock their bike to a bike rack outside. Is that for the employees? Is that for, we don't get a lot of locals riding their bikes to the hotels. I feel like there's some odd numbers in these. So I feel like hotels are weird. Churches is incredibly high. If you have 10 pews that can hold 10 people, you get up to 7 bike racks required immediately. But then again, our library that we are hoping to get at 20,000 square feet only requires 4 while it's on a bike path. I don't know how to, I feel like these numbers need some massaging to make sense. This, that 5,000 square foot restaurant only requires 3. I mean, that's my family. If we go on our 3 e-bikes, we've taken them all. I feel like these need to be looked at more. I understand that this is what's in existence for the rail yard, but I find them to be odd. So I don't know what that question is, but was there intention? Did someone look at these? I mean, I guess this was done with another. This was done with another. Independent source, but I don't think they fit our lifestyle.
Yeah, I can tell you that Emily did a lot of work on this section. She didn't just look at the rail yard. She compared it to several other jurisdictions that she felt were comparable to Truckee and had a similar bike culture. So she did do a lot of comparisons to make sure that what was being proposed was consistent with what other jurisdictions are doing. But we could take a closer look maybe at some of those demands if you think they're either too high or too low for particular uses.
Okay, yeah, I think that hotel one is crazy high. I think the library is too low. I don't understand why grocery stores would have less bike parking. I'm sorry, grocery stores have less bike parking than retail. I think it should be the other way around. Lots of people stop by the grocery store on their bike. Restaurants, again, general retail has a minimum of 4. Restaurants have a minimum of 2. Restaurants have more employees that might ride their bikes and more customers than retail, I would posit. Yeah, I feel like I'd be happy to come and look at those, but I feel like the way the numbers work out right now, when I went through and made some comparisons, it was weird. Part of me is I'm a little bit uncomfortable again with all the chopping that's happening here.
So Susie, pardon me to interrupt.
Oh yeah, no, sorry, I'm going into deliberation, not questions.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Yeah. So if you have any more specific questions, we can definitely get into all that in deliberation. So do you have any more specific questions for staff about bike parking?
I do want to say that I really appreciated that sort of apples to apples comparison here. It would have been nice to sort of see that in the report, but that's it. Thank you.
And you have a follow-up question, Dan?
Yeah, what defines a bike spot and how many bikes fit in a parking spot?
It's essentially just what a manufacturer would say is if they're selling a bike rack, that's how many bikes would fit on that bike rack, which normally for this normal, I guess, an ordinary bike rack where it's kind of the curvy,
Mustache.
Yeah, each lower area is the part that you would put your bike. So normally we've seen them hold 3 at a time, rather than the enclosed area. That's not necessarily considered a bike parking area. It's where you would lift it and put it in.
We do have size requirements for spaces that was already defined in the code, so we didn't change that. It had a minimum of 2 feet in width, 6 feet in length, and 7 feet of overhead clearance, if that helps.
Shoot, sorry, that 7 feet of overhead clearance reminded me of a question that I have here. Okay. So I would like to say for our long-term parking, what we talked about last month was that that long-term parking should be covered from the elements. I like that it's inside, but if there could be exterior long-term, could we sort of specify that long-term has to be covered? That 7 feet also, it seems to be in contradiction with that idea of a locker. What is the idea of the 7 feet? Does that?
I think that was a remnant of when we didn't have long-term, or right now in our current code where it doesn't have long-term parking or enclosed parking requirements. So I think that 7-foot clearance is for a standard outside bike parking space, but we can clarify that in the language.
Super, that would be great, because if it's a locker, it won't have that. Thank you.
Okay, I believe that concludes the questions for staff, clarifying questions on bike parking. Yumi, can you help me out with where we're at next? Plan developments, okay. Dan, would you like to start with questions for plan developments?
Let's see, I only had one question. Let me pull this up. It was, does the 25% low income requirement apply to a for rent planned development?
Yes.
And it'd be just the low income rental bracket?
Yes.
Or very low income or whatever it is?
Yeah, so we're trying to clarify that, well, I'm recommending now the 30%, that the affordable housing percentage would go up a little bit to 30%. And if it's a for rent product, we're clarifying that that's for very low and low. And if it's a for sale product, then it would have to be moderate, which is consistent with our inclusionary housing requirements.
Okay, that's all I had.
Commissioner Miller?
Thank you. Can you remind me the definition of very low and low income?
Low is up to 80% AMI, and very low is, I believe, up to 50% AMI.
And do you happen to know what % of current Truckee residents fall into those categories?
I don't have a good idea of that.
Yeah, I would be interested to know if we're targeting 30% of development, is that addressing the needs of 30% of our community, more or less? I appreciate that the number's going up, but it would be nice to be able to anchor that on something. Also, I'm curious, and the answer might just be similar to many of these, that it's just vestigial, why we're choosing one of a handful of features, because it feels like building 30 or some % affordable housing is so much more valuable to the community than any public art or bus stop, and I love all those things too, but would it be possible to just require affordable housing in a planned unit development and then allow some choice of the other buffet of options?
That is an option. I mean, I tried to look at what other jurisdictions have done. This is probably a pretty unique model that we have. It's kind of similar to what San Luis Obispo does, but we can make up what we want because we are asking, the applicants are asking for flexibility from us. So there is some sort of ability to come to some. We do want superior projects, so it is a way to incentivize those types of projects. I think when we did put the 4 different options, we were just trying to give some flexibility, some consideration to the developers so that their projects could potentially, if it is truly a good project, we want to encourage it. And we have, I believe, gotten some good public benefits like bike trails that aren't necessarily within their site that have served our community as a whole. So.
And I don't want to disparage the existing previous. We're all just working closer to a better version continuously. And then my last question, why exclude mixed use projects?
I wasn't trying to. I think this whole exercise is a little mind-boggling even for me. And I wasn't quite sure how to even frame a lot of these ideas, so I'm happy to discuss other options if you have other options. I think you asked me the question previously over email, when does a non-residential project that adds residential project, when is that a residential project? And that was a great question, and I hadn't thought about that. So I'm proposing to clarify in this presentation, I propose to clarify it to say that a mixed-use project would be allowed to provide affordable housing in the 25% of the floor area of the non-residential project. So instead of saying a non-residential project can provide housing, we're just saying a mixed-use project that meets that criteria, meets the criteria for the project mandatory feature. Additionally, I am proposing today, which wasn't in your staff report, to say that that requirement is on top of, in addition to, the workforce housing ordinance requirements. So if a project is required to do one workforce housing requirement, and then the 25% of their floor area would result in one additional housing unit, then they would have to do two affordable housing units to get this planned development option.
At the risk of totally butchering this, let me echo that back. So let's say you have 100 units of space or something, and 75% of it is for something that's not residential, and then 25%, a quarter of it is residential. Under this proposal, a third of that would have to be affordable, even though the majority of the project is non-commercial, or is non-residential. It is a mixed-use project.
No, I would say that if you have 100 units.
Mike.
Man.
It's good information. We want to hear it.
So when you have the idea is that if you have 100 units of affordable, or 100 units of non-residential, let's say 10,000 square feet of non-residential, and you want to do a planned development. So you have to come in with 25% of that floor area of 10,000 square feet to create an affordable housing project.
Square feet is the unit I'm supposed to use there. Okay, so 100,000 square feet of stuff, 75,000 square feet of that is non-residential, 25,000 is residential, so 30% of that square footage needs to be affordable units.
Yes.
And then workplace on top of that.
Yeah.
And that's carved out of the 75,000 that's dedicated to non-residential, or out of the component of non-affordable residential?
I have to admit that I'm confusing myself.
I think we need a whiteboard.
So, I mean, it might be that we need to cook this a little more, that particular line, because it is a new provision that we're proposing, and maybe we just need to take that out and just go back to how it was before and just say 30% affordable housing, if that's what the commission decides is the recommendation tonight, or we can go back to the 25% if you so choose.
I appreciate not being the only one who's confused. Thank you. No further questions.
Great. I would like to say that I am all in favor of upping that to a 30% affordable for that planned development. Thank you for even bringing that up. It's hard. I do like the fact that there was sort of an environmental standard, even though it was too easy or too hard. It would be lovely if we could try and find some sort of actual, reachable, accomplishable environmental standard to keep in there. And thank you for clarifying the mixed use affordable housing is in addition to the workforce housing. I think that needs more cooking.
I agree.
Okay, but I love that you brought it up. I love that it's an option. Let's cook it. Okay, oddly enough, both of the things that Ruth mentioned, the transit shelter and the public art, give me a little bit of heartburn, honestly. The transit shelter that went up, sorry, that's deliberation. So I was just wondering if we could maybe make that a freestanding transit shelter instead of like what happened at the grocery outlet where they put benches on the side of the building. I have other suggestions that I would love to suggest. Should I wait for deliberation for things that we could put into planned development?
Yes.
Okay, and then, the public art and the transit shelter give me a little heartburn as well. But and that was all I had for planned development. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Definitions. Mr. Commissioner Freeman, you have questions about definitions?
On the bar sink, and only having one allowable bar sink, if you have a second sink, where do we define what is a kitchen? Because if you have a second sink in your kitchen, does that mean you can't have another sink somewhere else? How do we define what a kitchen is, as far as the area that a kitchen is?
I'd have to look at how it's worded, but I think the limitation on the additional bar sink is in the section that talks about what you can have outside of a kitchen.
So that's exactly the point, is what is outside the kitchen? And I guess typically you'd see a second sink like in an island and a main sink in the perimeter countertop, but kitchens are getting more and more creative these days.
So for the definition of kitchen, it says at a minimum, a kitchen must include the following equipment: a sink for dishwashing and sanitation purposes. It doesn't necessarily say you can't have 7 sinks in that kitchen area. But if you want to, there isn't a clear definition of what the lines are of a kitchen. I think that's based on how you read the plans, and I think a little bit of common sense in looking at plans.
I just see a lot of these large homes, multiple wet bar areas in a house, or multiple, an outdoor sink, a bar sink. People get creative, and there's certainly, I don't think there's the intent to ever take those spaces and redevelop into an ADU or to a secondary rental unit, but to allow people who are going to build big houses and want to have multiple kitchens or sink areas not be limited by how we define a bar sink and where they're allowed to have a sink.
Yeah, I mean, if the commission doesn't think that that restriction makes sense, then we could talk about that.
Follow-up question, just a clarification. So an outdoor kitchen would be a secondary kitchen, right? I mean, is that
It would be an outdoor kitchen, but it wouldn't fall under the definition of this kitchen since it's a room or space within a building. So it's not within a building if it's an outdoor cooking area.
Fair enough, thank you. Dan, any other questions on definitions?
That's it. That's it for kitchen definitions.
Definitions in general.
Didn't we have one on retaining walls in here? Was that under definitions?
It was just carports was the other definition.
Okay, that's it for now.
We had a few other definitions scattered throughout too, so.
Commissioner Miller.
Being very successful in that. So just to clarify, this is probably a reiteration of the same question. I grew up in a not luxurious house with a bar sink in the laundry room, and that would be prohibited under this because it's a bar sink indoors outside the kitchen.
I think that would be a laundry sink.
But would you be allowed to do that if there's only one bar sink per house?
What if you had a toaster oven in your laundry room?
I don't think a bar
or a cocktail.
Typically, a utility sink would be bigger than a bar sink anyway.
Could you define bar sink? That might be my question.
Yeah, I believe it's 2 square feet or less. So a utility sink is probably going to, I mean, that's usually larger than that. But we could.
A slippery slope.
I'm learning so much.
Yeah. I mean, we could definitely refine it and make it explicit that it doesn't apply to utility rooms. Or, I mean, if you don't think that the restriction on additional sinks and living area throughout the house makes sense, then
we'll definitely converse in deliberations about the sinks.
That's it for me.
Susie, questions about definitions, specifically kitchens and carports?
No.
Okay. Next item. Fences and retaining walls. Dan?
The 6-foot height on a retaining wall, you have this photo here of a tiered retaining wall. What defines that 6 feet? How far does a tier need to be offset to where it's now considered 2 6-foot walls?
that's a good question. I don't think we define that in the code, but we could potentially add language to clarify that.
You could see a situation where, like the parking lots from last month.
Yeah, you're right, because if we don't have a separation requirement that makes, I mean, you can see the visual impact of having this, which is not very offset. I mean, even if it was offset 10 feet, the visual mass of that would probably still look pretty large. So potentially what we could do is say that the combined total of the different tiers can't be over 6 feet unless you meet the hillside design criteria.
I'll let you figure it out, but I think it needs some parameter.
Okay, yeah.
Commissioner Miller.
No, thank you.
Commissioner Tarnay.
So do retaining walls include that rockery type wall that we had last time?
A riprap wall, where it's just a rock slope, that's not a retaining wall. Retaining wall would be if it has footings and it's more of a structure.
Okay, so that was definitely sloped last time. Those were rockery walls, they said.
I think there was a combination with the project last time where they had some, if I remember correctly, there was some retaining walls and also some riprap.
There are stacked rockery walls that we see pretty frequently in our town. The new bike trail along 267 that uses rockery walls that isn't necessarily, it is engineered, so it does need footings. Do you know which rock walls I'm talking about?
No, I do, and I'm just, meaning they would not be allowed then?
That is considered a retaining wall, would be subject to this requirement.
Okay, so it would be a maximum 6-foot retaining wall anywhere in town, even if it was a rockery wall. Okay, and then I just wanted to clarify the residential fences and walls on parcels with an established land use are exempt from land use permit requirements. Can you still put a fence or a wall on a parcel without an established use, but you just need a land use permit?
I don't think we currently have a process to fence a vacant parcel.
Okay, so maybe we should change just that wording so that it doesn't make it sound like you can do it, you just need a permit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we can look at rewording that.
Okay, and that's all I have for walls. Thank you.
Moving on. Sewer requirements. Commissioner Freeman, questions?
No questions.
Commissioner Miller?
No questions.
Commissioner Tarnay?
I have a question, but what's the status of composting toilet permitting in the state, the county, the city, the world?
I talked a while back with environmental health about that because I think someone called asking if they could do a composting toilet, and they said under the environmental health requirements they could, but it was pretty difficult to do or expensive, so they didn't really see a lot of them up here.
Because this requirement would then eliminate that as a legal option, correct?
I suppose we could include language that says it has to be either connected to sewer or an approved composting toilet.
Well, but you've still got gray water to deal with.
That's true. I mean, our current standards do say that it should be, especially for commercial uses, needs to be connected to sewer. So I'm not really sure how to provide an exemption for composting toilets under that.
No, and I agree. I don't think we'd want that in commercial. I feel like this was in reference to residential sewer requirements on page 27. Let me real quick look at that.
Can I ask a question while she's looking that I thought of? So does this mean like the Lost Trail Lodge, for instance, that's probably on septic, couldn't?
That's not within the town of Truckee, but
if we had that sort of property somewhere?
If it had an approved on-site septic system, that would still be allowed to be used. Just new commercial projects aren't really allowed to be connected to an on-site sewage system. It'd have to be connected to public sewer.
And what if it's not available? Then you could not do a commercial use at that property.
or you'd have to bring the sewer system to the property.
I think there's some situations where Lahontan and Environmental Health are willing to look at septic systems if there is no sewer within a reasonable distance of the site.
Are we able to put some kind of verbiage in there that allows for a one-off exception?
Yeah, there's language in the residential section that talks about exemptions for subdivisions if the sewer is not located in close proximity to existing or future sewer lines. So potentially we could do something similar with commercial projects if there's interest. Okay.
Okay, moving on.
Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all right. So I am looking at the residential zoning district performance standards on page 27, but I think that part of the regulation was cut off there, because it does say sewer requirements, no land use shall be approved with on-site sewage disposal. Connection to sewer shall be required. It then does talk about the on-site septic systems. There is no mention of the possibility of the composting. I would love to see it in there.
Let's make a note of that, and we'll revisit.
And I'm all done. Yep.
Deliberation. Yeah. Okay. Next. Okay, property maintenance. Commissioner Freeman, questions about property maintenance?
No questions, except how to get out of it.
Commissioner Miller.
None for me.
Commissioner Tarnay, no questions. Moving on into outdoor seating. Commissioner Freeman.
No questions.
Commissioner Miller.
No questions.
Commissioner Tarnay.
I can't find my question, but, oh, there it is. So this is now set up. The community development director may waive this requirement for outdoor restaurants so that they do not have to provide indoor seating. And is this temporary, or will this persist post-COVID?
This would be a permanent standard.
Sweet. Thank you. I think that sounds great.
Moving on. Live-work units. Commissioner Freeman.
What is a work-live versus a live-work unit?
The difference is in which use is a more primary use. It's like a 60% versus a 40%. If it's more live space, then it's considered live work.
Is that a square footage calculation? Not a time calculation. Okay, that's it.
Commissioner Miller.
Square footage and not like ground floor or upper floor, sort of like primary first when you walk through?
I don't think the definition defines which floor it needs to be on. I think it just says 60/40, depending on whether it's more commercial or residential.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Commissioner Tarnay.
Instead of splitting these up, can we just put them on the same line in there? Live work / work live, and call it good?
So the reason we didn't do that is they're defined as separate uses. So typically in the land use tables, we'll separate those. One reason for that is if someone's looking alphabetically for something, they might not think to look under live work for work live, and they might assume that because they don't see it, it's not an allowed use.
Just think it's hilarious that we're assuming that someone is assuming that live work is different than work live, but yep, either way, it's fine.
Also to point out, in our downtown, in the areas that are more commercially zoned, live work is only allowed through like a minor use permit, whereas they're not necessarily the same standard of review.
Okay, moving on. Grading and vegetation, Commissioner Freeman.
I was curious, does a grading permit satisfy the ability to remove trees prior to the issuance of a building permit?
Yes.
So, is that what this says? Because it says to ensure building permits issued prior to removal of vegetation.
Sure. That's in the actual language. It says grading or building permits.
Oh, okay, cool. That's all.
Commissioner Miller?
No.
Commissioner Tarnay?
No, thank you.
Moving on. Commissioner Freeman, height measurements and height limit exceptions.
No questions.
Commissioner Miller?
No questions.
Commissioner Tarnay?
No, thank you.
Okay, moving on. Standards for hillside development, Commissioner Freeman.
For what it's worth, I always thought 2 to 1 meant the 1 to 2, because 2 to 1 is super steep.
I've had this conversation multiple times.
Commissioner Miller?
None for me.
Commissioner Tarnay?
No.
Okay. Otter Lake Development Standards, Commissioner Freeman.
So does this mean property owners are picking up 4 feet of vertical land in the high water line?
That's correct.
That's it?
Commissioner Miller?
None for me.
Commissioner Tarnay?
Do we actually know, I mean, is this a change in high water, or is it just a change in where you're measuring from?
It is actually a change in the high water line. So the datum changed, but it's still a change in the actual feet.
And the water no longer goes that high?
I believe that there was an argument made by the Donner Lake property owners that this isn't a natural lake. The high water line is not the natural high water line, that it's actually much lower. So I think it was a concession that State Lands Commission made so that they didn't have to necessarily spend out years in litigation, and made a concession.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, whoa, hold on, back up. Come on. I know we're ready for a break. So when the lake is full, do we know what surface elevation that is? Just out of curiosity.
I don't know that number. I can find out for you.
No, it's all right. Moving on. Next slide. Okay, application for content for floodplains. Commissioner Freeman.
No questions.
Commissioner Miller.
No questions.
Commissioner Tarnay.
Me either, thank you.
Moving on. Signage. Dan.
I guess the only question I have is when it says prohibited linear LED lights to avoid overlighting. That seems like a broad term. All the lights everything's LED, correct? And what is linear?
I think we could probably provide a better definition. It's intended to be this photo on the right of this linear light, but we could perhaps make a dimension about beyond 3 feet in length, or...
Yeah, like we don't want the guy's light bar on top of his Jeep on your sign, but if you have 3 spotlights next to each other, is that linear?
If they're spotlights, no. If they're just like a...
What if it's one fixture with 3 spotlights on it?
That would be considered 3 fixtures. I guess I can't.
Just some gray, just maybe some gray area and a way to define what is linear. Because how else do you light a sign properly?
Sure. I think the fixture itself is intended, the LED light is supposed to be multiple light fixtures in a row, so I could make that clearer. If there's a particular dimension that you think is also appropriate, we can also add that in there. I can clarify that a little more, but it's not intended to stop fixtures from being placed in a line.
Yeah, okay.
Commissioner Miller?
Do we have a sense of how many signs currently would fall out of compliance with the warmer sign lighting color requirement?
I don't have that information. We haven't done a sign lighting inventory.
That's fair. What was the idea to change the shade of light requirement?
Sure. We have, our HPAC is very adamant that they would like to see warmer lights in our downtown, and there's benefit in seeing that elsewhere, just to create a more ambient neighborhood feel. But if that's something you'd like to think about more, we can.
And so it's for aesthetics, not for visibility. Is there any difference in ability to see over distance with different lighting?
Not that I know of.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Commissioner Tarnay?
I just want to clarify that linear LED lights do not include like the little the Christmas lights or the twinkle lights over bars and stuff, correct?
Festoon lighting, no, it doesn't. I can try to create a better definition for this type of lighting that looks more like what you see on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen.
Thank you.
Maybe a photo of what would be an approved fixture versus a not approved fixture.
Okay, animal raising. Commissioner Freeman.
No questions.
Commissioner Miller.
No questions.
Commissioner Tarnay.
No questions.
Okay. Bed and breakfast inns. Commissioner Freeman.
No questions.
Commissioner Miller.
Some very basic ones, yes. What is the difference between a bed and breakfast and a short-term rental?
Let me. So a bed and breakfast is intended to have multiple rooms in a building that's rented out, as opposed to a short-term rental, which is usually the whole house or one bedroom in the house.
So are there bed and breakfasts with only one? Is it possible to have a bed and breakfast with only one room?
Yes, there are, as you know, there are people who have primary homes and they rent out a room occasionally. That is technically considered a bed and breakfast. It is one of those that are exempt from our bed and breakfast minor use permit requirements. They're still required to pay transient occupancy tax, but they are exempt from getting land use permits from us.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Tarnay?
Just a quick couple. The bed and breakfast has an upper limit as well, doesn't it? Is it only
5 rooms.
5?
I think it's 5. Once it gets beyond 5, it's a hotel or a motel.
Why did I have 3?
It's definitely 5. It says a bed and breakfast inn with 5 or more guest rooms is considered a hotel or motel.
Okay, great, thank you. And then, are there any existing bed and breakfasts in town with detached units? I feel like there's some over on Lake Tahoe. I don't know if, does it then, what happens? It then becomes a hotel, and we're trying to keep, the bed and breakfast can be in residential and the hotel cannot? Is that what's going on?
I don't think it would be permitted, because if it is a single-family home with a detached living area is not technically allowed to be rented.
Oh, okay. So we don't have any existing bed and breakfasts with little separate cabins or anything?
There may be short-term rentals that we don't know about, but not a formal bed and breakfast that we've approved, that I can think of.
Okay. And then we are making the distinction in order to, a bed and breakfast can be in residential area, is that correct?
Yes, with, I believe, minor use permit approval.
Okay, and then if you have more than 5 rooms, that becomes a hotel and it's not allowed in residential?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, exempt temporary uses and events. Commissioner Freeman?
I liked Ruth's comment from her email she sent. Why would we not want to allow food trucks to congregate?
I think it's a good question. We've talked about that as both staff and I think with other planning commissions in the past. It is something that is of interest and is popular in many other jurisdictions. I think if we do want to bring it back and discuss it, I think it's a larger discussion topic rather than just a cleanup where we're just trying to make things a little bit more clear. I think some businesses would be interested in having this discussion if it becomes a more established use within town. The idea behind this is an exemption to the temporary use permit, so we don't necessarily have to look at it. We keep it in a pretty tight box, so we don't have to think about it or care about it. If they stay within that box, then we are not requiring additional land use permits. If it becomes a larger thing, I think that there's potential that we would want to look at traffic and impacts to parking and aesthetics.
Got it. So if you want to have one food truck, you're fine. If you want to have more than that, then it's a separate discussion. Basically, not that the window is closed. What if you have a food truck at your house? Is that allowed?
If you have a private event, yes, you can have a food truck at your house, but the idea behind this particular, if you're doing a more commercial operation, it's intended to be in a established non-residential site.
Just some additional context too. So we had a really interesting experiment with COVID where we created different guidelines to allow for outdoor activity than what we had in the development code. So we essentially said you can have, food trucks for the same amount of time that you have the business open. We were just getting rid of some of our restrictions to make it a little more flexible for people so that if they didn't have we just wanted more outdoor activity downtown. And we did get some feedback from some of the businesses that were concerned when the 2 food trucks popped up on one property, and originally one was on a vacant piece of property, which was a challenge. And then we had a request for 6 on one piece of property that didn't have an established land use and wasn't actually a paved parking lot. It was sort of a not great kind of area that had been forgotten about a little bit. And then it started to kind of have this discussion with the downtown merchants about what is appropriate for downtown, and if we are going to allow food trucks, more long-term, because right now most of these food trucks wouldn't be allowed if we applied our current development code standards because they were taking up parking that was required for the businesses. So it was a little bit of an experiment to see, are people going to use them? How are the businesses really impacted? I mean, we didn't know if they were being impacted by or not because we hadn't had any food trucks downtown because of our restrictions. So I think we're learning some stuff. This was just an interim, and then kind of to what Laura and Yumi were saying is that we can come back in and allow for maybe some other type of permit that has some discretion to it to look at unique circumstances where it might be appropriate to have more food trucks. I know that Truckee Lumber, with them vacating their site, they have some interest in doing that, and that could be a totally appropriate location because it's not really next to other businesses that would be impacted, and that could be sort of the next step of this, where we look and say, this is an appropriate location, let's see how it works to have, multiples. Truckee actually doesn't have that many food trucks. You can see a scenario with Truckee Thursdays where people are coming up from other areas to bring their food trucks, and that was also another concern that the businesses raised is, are we now just inviting Reno food trucks to come up and reinvent what they're doing in Reno in Truckee? And so there's just some larger discussions that we've been having through COVID, actually, that we're learning kind of about how food trucks could work in Truckee, and so this was just sort of a first step.
Okay, sorry, is that it for food trucks?
I don't think
No,
I said
sorry.
anything.
Yeah, right, sorry, I lost track. So Commissioner Miller.
Speaking of food I'm glad that reply all paid off. Thank you. So where did the requirement for paved surfaces come from? Because I'm thinking of the location by the 7-Eleven where the farmers market happens now. That's not a paved surface, but works for farmers market trucks and stands.
Which 7-Eleven are you referring to?
The regional park.
Thank you.
It is somewhat of an ADA access limitation for us that we're looking at these food trucks when they come in to ensure that they do have access. And so if you have uneven surfaces, it's different. I think that farmers markets are treated different than the typical food truck scenario coming on a piece of property, but we could definitely look in that more.
Again, fascinating. So many nuances. And then my last question to Dan's question about could I have one in my house? Could you speak more about how that gray area could pencil out? I understand starting a restaurant in my house violates the residential zoning that I have, but especially in this era of COVID, more people are working from home in their neighborhoods, don't necessarily want to come downtown. I don't know if that necessarily needs to be encoded in the permanent development plan, but I could certainly see an interest in having a temporary lunch-only way to get food in a neighborhood. So I'm curious if you could speak to what that line actually is.
You can have a food truck at your house if it only has one sink.
I think if you have an active event going on at your property, like a wedding for your daughter or something, or your son, but there isn't a fine definition of what a private catering event is, so someone could push that line, and then at that time, I think we would figure out what that line is.
Would you need a special events permit to be able to bring a bunch of people and have a bunch of...
Not currently. I mean, once you start impacting the right-of-way, that's when we start requiring special event permits, but if it's just on your property, it's a small event. I mean, a wedding could potentially overflow, but it's a one-time event, we think. And if it becomes an ongoing issue where we get neighborhood complaints about having a wedding every weekend, it's a commercial venue, then that's when we start looking at it a little closer.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to imagine I could save most of this for deliberation, but I'm trying to imagine the scenario where maybe the lumberyard wants to have multiple food trucks on their private property and out of the right of way. Would they need a special events permit to be able to do that, even if it was like a repeating event weekly?
If it's outside whatever their new approval would be, yes, they would have to do a temporary use permit to get that approved. But it would be something that we could potentially look at. Okay. And I think we're trying to encourage them to do that.
How high is the bar for that, out of curiosity? Is that
the temporary use permit?
Yeah.
It's not very high. It has to be temporary in nature. You have to be willing to clean it up afterwards. We look at parking impacts.
So it's more of a form you fill out than follow the rules.
It's also noticing other agencies to make sure there aren't any other building issues that we haven't caught or fire issues that we should look at. But it's also, because it is on a temporary basis, there is the potential that if you are not a good neighbor and you don't do the temporary use properly, that we wouldn't issue it again the following year.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Commissioner Darnay.
Just a quick couple of questions. Are the COVID rules right now still in effect for food trucks? Yes. Okay, Danielle is nodding yes. know when they'll be extended through? No.
So they're in effect through the 30th of this month, and Becky and I are currently working on the next round of them, which has some little bit different requirements that we're looking at, including a permit that would be free, but a way for us to track what types of outdoor activities we're permitting within town property. We haven't quite gotten to the food truck discussion yet because part of the challenge will be that they're currently using required parking for those businesses. And so if we allow them to continue, particularly downtown, then with snow removal and storage and these other things, it's going to get really challenging. So we haven't resolved that totally yet, but we will make that decision before the end of the month.
Oh, that sounds challenging. Okay, and so currently they can currently operate more than 6 hours a day.
Yes, they can operate during the business hours of the business that's on site.
Oh. Okay. Like the ice cream truck, is that business is not open though?
So as you can tell, we're not actively enforcing a lot of these guidelines because we're trying to be flexible. So that is an example where, again, an experiment for us to kind of see which ones are doing what, when. And it actually hasn't created any challenges. We haven't had complaints about them being open later at night. And it's not a heavily used parking area because Tahoe Dave's is only doing ski returns at this point. They're not actively running their shop, so.
And I am grateful, and I love me some ice cream from the ice cream truck. So thank you so much for allowing that experiment to happen. And that is all I have.
Moving on to...
I have one more quick one.
Oh, yeah,
Sorry.
follow-up question.
Yeah. Would it be possible to park your food truck in a street parking space as long as you're feeding the meter? And then are there within the permitted amount of time that a private vehicle is allowed to use that space?
Currently, I don't believe we do allow for food trucks in the parking district, even with payment of the parking fees.
Okay.
Yeah, it's required to be on private property with the property owner's permission.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Okay. Next up, we have appeals. Commissioner Freeman.
No questions.
Commissioner Miller.
What motivated the proposal to limit appeals to people who previously made comment?
This was, we've been getting few more appeals, and we always thought this was in our code, but it's not actually in our code. So we talked to our town attorney, and he suggested that we put it in our code to be explicit, and said, based on his recommendation, he said is something standard that other jurisdictions do. We also think that it is a good change in that it does allow for us to work with developers as during the public process, so that they are aware of what the issues are, so that they could, what we like to call, and as you know, the Truckee way, that things are transparent, people understand what the issues are. The Planning Commission, when you review the project, you understand what everyone's issues are and can make an informed decision based off of all parties being involved at that time.
Was he specific about what jurisdictions have this rule?
He didn't. I did a little research myself, and I found a number of them that had this restriction. I think San Diego is one that comes to mind, but I can't remember any others.
When you say a number, was that like, how far do I have to go to find another jurisdiction that does this?
I think it's a pretty common requirement. Okay. There are some that require standing, which is somebody who lives close to the property or adjacent to the property, and we thought that would be a little too onerous. And we do want to encourage people to be part of the process. We do noticing pretty early on in the application process. When we deem it complete, we require applicants to put noticing on the property so that people who walk by or drive by regularly can see that there's a project on that site. So there is information out there to get people involved. But I mean, I understand that there are challenges with that and getting people interested in government work, but it is something that we try to do.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Commissioner Tarnay.
So when you do that noticing, does that include the date of that meeting?
No, usually we don't know. Well, the first notice, we don't know when the actual meeting will be, because it's just the preliminary application phase. Once the application is identified, that, or the hearing date is identified, then that's when we notice it to neighbors again. We ask the applicants to change the sign on site, and then we put a notice in the paper at least 10 days before the hearing.
For every planning commission and town council meeting, you put a notice in the paper 10 days beforehand?
That's correct.
I don't actually think that's correct. I called the lawyer and asked him today, and he said it's only certain things that you notice.
For planning commission items, well, all planning items that require a public hearing, such as development review projects, which is mainly in your purview, those are all all noticed 10 days ahead of time. Some town council items, they aren't necessarily noticed 10 days in advance.
Okay. So this is talking about appeals for the planning commission. Are there appeals for town council decisions?
No, once the town council takes action, that action is final, except they can pursue litigation and sue us within 30 days.
Okay, and sorry, so clarify again what gets 10 days notice in the paper?
All development review applications that you review, the development code updates.
So we have two different types of notices that go in the paper. There's the legal notices, and then for development code, we do a display ad, because that doesn't fall under the same requirements as a development project. But we do provide notice for both types of hearings. And we also now post all of those notices on our website. So anytime Carissa sends out a notice of anything, it gets posted.
Okay, I have discussion for that. I don't have any more questions.
I had a follow-up question if you're not. Go ahead. How often does someone appeal who did not make a comment at a meeting? Mostly because that was the public comments that we got, both were referring to that specific thing.
I'd say it's occasionally that we get a comment or an appeal from someone who didn't participate, but by and large, most are typically folks that did express opposition and then they elect to appeal.
Any other questions? Okay. Workforce housing requirements, Commissioner Freeman.
I had a question before, but you clarified it with, it's one, if not, and then two. So no questions.
Commissioner Miller?
No questions.
Commissioner Tarnay?
Just to clarify that workforce housing, if it's an employee in there, there is no rental restriction on that. They can charge whatever they can get.
That's correct.
Okay, I have no questions. All right, so we're a little over 2 hours in, so let's take a 10-minute recess. That sound good to everybody? Okay, so I've got 7:07 right now. We will reconvene at 7:17. Okay, let's call this meeting back to order. Susie, I believe you did have one more clarifying question about height. Is that correct?
I did, just real quick, that height exemption, they were talking about the maximum height up to an additional 10 feet. So there can still be an exception to that. And I can't remember when we granted that last time. Was it a planned development? We granted a height exemption along with other, and that was because of 100% affordable housing. Is that correct?
Yeah, yes, there was for Freshman Hollow, we did a density bonus concession for height.
Okay, and so that will still exist? You can still grant an exemption to that,
Yes.
the new height one?
So this height measurement exemption, or I think leniency, flexibility, is only for single-family residential homes, and it's a staff level review, and if it's on a steep slope, you get additional height.
Okay, so it doesn't change that, and it doesn't change that you can still get those exemptions for those other applications. Thank you, that's all.
Okay, and then before we get into deliberation, I do have one last question for staff, and that's really just about this whole big package altogether. Is there a way that we can cut some of these up and approve some things that are the low-hanging fruit so that we can get those just out of the way, and then some of the stuff that may be a little bit more controversial, we can get as far as we can on it and see if...
Yes, you can move some things forward and ask for things to be held back.
Okay, all right. So that being said, commissioners, I kind of want to take everybody's temperature and see, what do we have in this packet tonight that we can just rubber stamp and just move along with? Commissioner Miller?
Animals.
Okay.
We all like the animals.
Okay. Freeman?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up because I had kind of the same thought. Animals, the chickens, we'd start with that.
Okay. Susie, you okay with just...
I'm all good with chickens, yes.
Okay. All right. So check one box. Okay. How about bike parking?
I think that's going to be tough because we have a lot. We want to change all the bike parking requirements and the numbers.
Okay. So no bike parking just yet. What else can we eliminate early on in the elimination?
You want to start
rounds
going
here?
through this and go to each heading, like either yes, let's...
Yeah, okay, so ADUs.
Either like we can approve it, let's approve it, or let's kick it down the road for deliberation and then come back.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for the recommendation, Dan. Okay, so we're going to have to kick this one down for deliberation.
Yes.
The ADUs?
Yeah. Okay, residential accessory uses and structures.
I'm uncomfortable with it, but I think I can get over that. I think it's okay.
Commissioner Freeman?
No, I think this has got some deliberation here.
Okay.
Deliberation.
Agreed? Okay, deliberation. Okay. Bicycle parking, deliberation. Plan developments, deliberation. Definitions, deliberation.
Gotta talk about those kitchens.
Gotta talk about those things. Okay, moving on from definitions. Fences.
I think that there was some concern about the
Retaining wall offset.
retaining wall offsets, yeah.
Next. Sewer requirements.
I wanted to see composting toilets.
Okay, well, we can talk about that. Next. Clean up property maintenance.
This one seems straightforward.
That seems straightforward.
Sounds good.
Okay, property maintenance and the bees, check. Okay, excuse me, not bees.
Come on.
Animals,
Come
chickens,
on.
chickens. Outdoor seating.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Okay, so that goes. Live work, that seems like an easy one.
Good with this?
Okay,
It's fine.
okay. Grading,
Yes.
Yes.
okay. Height.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good with that, Dan, height? Yep, okay. Hillside standards.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Donner Lake Amendment standards,
Yes.
good?
Yeah, do we have anything to even?
Not really.
Yeah, there's nothing we can even
Just
talk
making
about.
sure we have consensus so that there's no question. Floodplains, okay with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Signage.
We asked for
We have some clarification on some of those light fixtures. Yep, got it. Okay, so we'll chat about that. Animals, we already know about that. Bed and breakfast. Susie?
No, we're good.
Good? Okay, everybody? All right, so that one's good. Food trucks. Do we need to talk about that more?
Yes.
Yep, okay. Okay, appeals. I feel like that's something we need to talk about. Yep.
Yep.
Okay, and workforce housing requirements.
I'm okay with this.
Yeah.
Well, we had some additional discussion as in, was that? No, sorry, that was plan development. What was the workforce? I would like to talk about workforce housing.
Okay.
Okay. Where does that leave us, staff?
Do you want to know what you're approving?
Yeah, let's just recap that.
Okay, you're approving without change. The sections are exemptions from development code, which is, I believe, the,
Chickens?
no, that was the fences. No, there's fences, walls, and hedges. There's the
No, but I thought we said we needed to,
property maintenance.
we were going to deliberate on the fences, correct?
You're right.
Correct.
Okay,
I think
it's live work.
I think the first one was a different fence reference. It's in 2 sections, I think.
You're approving the live work units, the grading and vegetation removal, height measurements and height limit exceptions, property maintenance, standards for hillside development, lake and reverse stream corridor development, Donner Lake development standards, animal raising and keeping, bed and breakfast inns, outdoor seating, and workforce. Oh no, you wanted to talk about workforce housing.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so let's just take it from the top and move back to the ADUs.
We might even want to take this a step further and think about ones that we could get through today
Okay,
and ones that we're probably not going to get through today.
okay, very good
Again,
point.
try and whittle that list down.
Yeah, okay, so what do we think we have the least to talk about in these? Let's see, we could probably get through lighting pretty quick, because I think we just wanted to get some definitions established on that, the neighbor, or the Jeep light bar versus what we're gonna,
Signage.
how we're gonna define it. Yeah, and the signage. So let's move to signage. Thanks, Dan.
You want to talk about it now?
Okay, and it just sounded like really the only thing that we were, well, there was one comment about, have we done any kind of an inventory on how many lights are going to have to change by changing the temperature? And then also, so I guess that's a question that we had about how much impact does that have? So this is going to be, by updating this, it's going to be retroactive, so that this is, no, it's not going to be. You're shaking your head no. Okay. So
It's
this
only
is for new signage going forward. Okay. Got it. So it doesn't have an impact. So it's not punitive for people that have, a brighter blue or whatever. So, okay. Who wants to jump in on how do we define what this linear LED light to avoid language should be like?
I like Dan's suggestion just to have examples. We want this thing, we don't want this thing, include manufacturers. If there are any that already exist in the community, point to those.
Yeah, agreed. I think you could have 3 or 4 that are approvable and 3 or 4 that are not approvable, and then an applicant still needs to submit a light for approval with their sign, and the staff can make the decision. Is it possible to make existing signs change light bulb color when they do replace light bulbs, or recommend, or put something in there?
We can encourage.
Because light bulbs still burn out and you got to replace them.
Yes. I mean, we could encourage, we can, yeah, we can definitely encourage. I mean, it's hard for us because we don't necessarily get involved when they're just changing out a light bulb. But
Well, yeah. I mean, you have to do some sort of outreach,
Yeah.
right?
Do you have a temperature light that you're going to,
it's 3,000 Kelvin or less.
or less?
Okay. So
What is the, what do we call a synthetic material?
Acrylic, vinyl, and then synthetic material. It's very broad.
I think that's it.
Yeah,
for me.
okay. So is that clear enough direction for staff then? Okay, great. What else do we think we can get through easily, commissioners?
The compost toilets item?
Yeah, I think we can, yeah, let's move to sewers. So, so there's nothing in our code right now that prohibits composting toilets, right? But the sewer serves multiple functions. It's not just for human waste, it's also for gray water and other, light household industrial uses, your laundry sink and things like that. So I hear your point, Susie, about we should encouraging composting toilets is something that is a discussion that should be had. But I think looking at the bigger picture, I don't think that there's a way for us right now to construct a residence, and certainly not a commercial use, where we can have that be. I mean, there's always going to be a need for that gray water elimination, and we can't do it without sewers.
Right, and there is an exception for when you are attached to an approved septic system. So let me look at, can someone tell me what page that's on? I can't find it in my notes right now.
27 and 28 of the staff report.
I just want to make sure that we're not ruling them out of hand. Does that make sense?
I guess there's if there's a toilet, there's a hand washing need, kind of for a health and safety requirement.
No, and I totally understand that even if you have a composting toilet, you have other water usage that is not going to go into there. I just wanted to. Staff, can you tell me if, are we ruling it out of hand because it's not listed as an exception, or that's my question. Does that make sense?
I mean, there's nowhere in the code that says residences are prohibited from having composting toilets.
Right. I don't think the code talks about composting toilets at all.
And this is just for commercial use.
Well, no, this is also residential zoning and district performance standards. There's a residential section in there as well because it was brought up for the portable toilets, the porta potties used on a temporary basis. That's the only reason I brought up residential. I'm not suggesting that we use composting toilets for commercial because I don't think that is a recipe for success.
But the portable toilet can only be used on basically an active construction site with an active building permit.
Correct. I agree. Yes, I see that. I just don't know. The problem is that there's not the entire code quoted here, and I didn't know. That's all. It's fine. I think.
What happens when you have these examples are probably outside of town of Truckee, but some of the snowmobile outfits that do snowmobile services and tours in the winter, and as the commercial use, they probably have porta potties, don't they? Where
I don't know.
Everybody parks and
I don't know
gathers.
if we have any operating in the town. I know there's several operating in the county, so I'm not sure what their requirements are.
Or how about Piping Rock Equestrian Center?
Piping Rock has flushing toilets.
Not the ones for the kids to use. They have a porta potty on a trailer. Not to pick on them, but as an example, as a commercial use.
They're supposed to have a bathroom for all of the customers to use. So if they are, that's not in compliance with their use permit.
To ask a similar question without naming the site, there's another porta potty somewhere in the town of Truckee for that. I'm sure, I don't know, maybe it's temporary, but it's for unhoused people that are there at the moment, which seems like a very kind, empathetic thing to do. Is that something that's currently permittable?
Since I don't know the exact business, I don't know. If it's something that's COVID related, we're doing emergency operations that are not necessarily in the scope of our code. If it's something that has been approved, it likely is outside the scope of their approval if it is an established permanent use.
Yes, I'm fine. Let's just move on from sewer. Thank you.
All right, next in order of least amount of contention.
Workforce housing?
Workforce housing. I'll take workforce housing for 500.
So a few thoughts just to jump in on this. I'm a little concerned that it's at market rate for employees. That seems like a great way to make sure that your employees pass on their right of first refusal. I'm also curious if it is possible to offer this to people that aren't W-2 employees, just given the presence of seasonal 1099 workers. Those are my two main thoughts. Just how to make this as expansive as possible.
I guess as an employer, your incentive is you could probably get the most money renting it to your employee, and if they don't take it, now you are subject to a much lower rental rate. So I think the incentive, I like the way this is designed, where it's try and get your employee to rent it for whatever you can get them to rent it for, but if it's too much and they can't rent it, then you're stuck with this component too.
So this gives me heartburn as well. It sort of seems like housing is so hard to get. It's kind of like the old-fashioned company store of you need housing and we have housing and this is what you pay. It's I feel uncomfortable with it because if you don't, I feel like they need to unionize in order to get their housing at an affordable rate. It makes me very uncomfortable. I have to say, looking at that section, at the very beginning, it says the goal of workforce housing is to ensure an adequate supply of housing to meet the housing needs of all segments of the community and provide permanent supply of affordable housing to meet the needs of very low, and moderate income workers generated by new commercial, industrial, institutional, recreational. I feel like there should be at least a limit that it be moderate, which is minor, but yeah.
Chair, if I may? This is a cleanup item. It wasn't something that we did notice like we did the other 4 discussion items. So this is just intended to be a clarifying item. If you do intend, if the Planning Commission as a whole would like to forward a recommendation to the council to direct us as a staff to come back with a revised workforce housing ordinance looking at affordability requirements for component 1, we can do that. We can incorporate that into the resolution. But if you're trying to make a change to the actual substance of the workforce housing ordinance, then I think we should defer that to a future date.
How does that sit with you, Susie?
I am totally happy deferring to a future date. Was that the question?
You may want to just forward a recommendation to council about the workforce housing, that you would like a more expansive review of the workforce housing ordinance.
Awesome. And I would like to say, because it says that very low, and moderate, just when does the workforce housing ever address the very low or low? That's my question.
So we're recommending to council that we want to dig deeper on this. Okay.
It's fine.
Everyone good with that?
Yes.
Okay. Can we jump to definitions? I feel like that's probably a pretty easy one. Yeah, I share the I think. I don't see why we would prohibit the number of bar sinks. I don't see why we would prohibit the number of sinks. I don't see why we would define the number of sinks. Especially with a lot of these larger houses that we're seeing. We're seeing an outdoor kitchen. We're seeing a laundry. We're seeing a kitchen with, a vegetable sink, a cocktail sink, a prep sink. I think we're just hamstringing the design process. So I think that's the only thing that we need to change, in my opinion.
And why were we doing that? Because we didn't want areas turned into illegal junior ADUs? Is that why? But doesn't that give us more options for possible long-term rental housing?
I guess even an illegal unit does house somebody.
And an illegal unit's already illegal. If they're going to go and do that, then presumably there are other things they violated that we can get them on other than just the number of sinks.
Yeah, I'm fine with not restricting the number of sinks.
Plus, are we going to define what a bar sink is, and then someone says, well, this is a utility sink at this other location?
So I think we've got consensus that we don't want to get into the micromanaging of sinks. Yeah.
Can we call it sunk?
Okay, and with that, what else do we think we can get through this evening?
So what is that? We're basically approving definitions without the sink?
I think we're saying we're not limiting the numbers of sinks, correct? That's what I'm saying. That we are not saying how many bar sinks you can have.
Correct.
What does that leave under the cleanup amendments?
Just to be, for clarity, the carports are okay with as,
Carports I'm fine with. Anybody else have any comment on carports?
Love it.
No comment.
that leaves
Fences, walls, and hedges?
fences, walls, and
Or
hedges.
no, the question was about the
Hillside.
the hillside retaining walls, not fences, walls, and hedges, correct?
Standards for hillside, appeals, temporary uses, the food truck one. Those are the three that I have.
We could do retaining walls.
Let's go to retaining walls.
Can we just pick a number for an offset for what a tier is
I mean, so
defined
that's the
as?
contention, right? Is like what's the,
I mean, if you do a 6-foot wall and then it's back 2 feet and then another 6-foot wall, is that 2 6-foot walls or is that one 12-foot wall?
But if it's back 6 feet and there's a tree in the middle,
Yeah, or what is it? Is it 6 feet? Is it 8 feet? Is it 12 feet? What's a good recommended number? Also, you do.
equal distance for equal height seemed like it would be,
Ooh, nice, elegant.
yeah.
And then there is the variance for a hillside development. So likely in a situation where you need that tall of a retaining wall, you are in a hillside scenario and you need a variance anyway. Is that right?
If it's over 20% slope, you would need a use permit for, not for residential, but for commercial.
And we could do some quick math and figure out if it's a wall 6 feet tall and you have a 6-foot flat section and then another 6-foot wall, what's the slope of that hillside? Is it 2 to 1 or 1 to 2?
sorry, so 6 feet and then 6 feet and then another 6 feet?
That's a 2 to 1.
So 12 to, yeah, 2 to 1.
If you 6 foot here, 6 foot here, that's 2 to 1. A 1 to 1 slope.
Yeah.
If we want to say 2 to 1, this is 12 feet here.
Well, if you, I think I was giving that example where you go a little higher there and now that's,
This would be 1 to 1 here. This would be.
we need a whiteboard, someone?
If it's 12 feet back and 6 feet tall, that's a 1 to 2 slope,
Correct.
which is what we're saying is okay on the slope calculation.
If that's a question, yes.
So maybe that's the number.
1 to 2.
A 1 to 2 slope. So if you have a 6-foot tall wall, you need a 12-foot horizontal run before you can have another 6-foot tall wall.
But that was an unprotected slope. This is a protected wall. I'm sorry, so say that again, Daniel? You want for a 6-foot height, you want a 12-foot gap before you have another 6-foot height?
Yeah.
I'm just. I guess that's not really what I'm shooting for. What I'm asking for. I'm just kind of rationalizing that in my head.
The other option would be to apply it to the total height regardless of how it's tiered and say if it's over 6, it needs a variance so that it can be looked at a little more closely.
So anything over 6 feet needs a variance and needs to be looked at a little more closely. I mean, that seems, but that's done just at the staff level at the counter, right?
A variance would be a zoning administrator review.
Okay.
That seems appropriate.
Yeah. What's that? 2 thumbs up from Danielle.
I think she
Okay.
was saying, gee, thanks.
She is our zoning administrator.
She does have the
So-
corner office.
So we are saying that if that it is still a 6-foot wall if you don't have more than 12 feet between them. Is that correct? If you have that offset that they have in that picture, that 1-foot offset, that is make it not a 6-foot wall, correct?
Well, I think we're saying if it's anything over 6 feet, it goes to Danielle.
So what you're seeing in the picture would go.
Perfect.
What's that? Yeah, but you're right. Okay, let's see here.
So can we clarify for our notes? So you want anything over a 6-foot wall to go through a variance process? Or potentially it could be a planned development where they would come in front of you for flexibility?
Yes.
Okay.
I think they were clarifying overall wall height versus height of each segment.
Correct. That is what we are now talking about.
Okay, so what do we think is next here? Appeals?
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one. Who wants to start?
I'd be happy to.
Please.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with the public comment. I think that for the most part, you get some of these things you get 10 days notice on, but you don't have the detail that comes out in that staff report. So I feel like the members of the public, they get 5 days. If you miss that because you're sick, because you're out of town, because you're on vacation, because your internet's down, then you just have no way to be involved. I don't see any, I just don't see why you would want to cut off this public involvement. And it's not free. I mean, if you appeal something, it's like, can staff tell me it's somewhere between $600 and $1,000, correct?
It's $1,000 for town council, to appeal to town council. Yes.
Okay, so I don't think people are undertaking this lightly. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but $1,000 is a lot for me. So I don't feel like it's, yeah, I feel like you may be within your rights to not do that, but I don't necessarily think it's the right thing to do. So I would like to keep that appeals process as a last minute option. I also agreed that there's things that can come up in deliberation after the public comment has already happened that then you don't have an option to public comment on. So I see that as another reason to have that appeal process available.
I agree with those comments.
Yeah, I think that's pretty valid, actually, that we could deliberate and then you could think of something and you've missed your chance to comment.
Yeah. Okay. So
we do that here. Like we've gone back
Right.
and forth a few times just asking questions as other questions come up. I think that's, I'd like to see more action to make it easier for people to engage and not send the signal that we don't want their participation.
okay, so we have consensus on that.
And you guys are all right with the rest of that? The town council can no longer decide that they want to just hear something again up there. That was part of that one. I didn't even know that was an option until now, which I think is really interesting.
Okay, so that leaves us with bikes, ADUs,
Food trucks.
and food trucks. Let's jump to food trucks next.
We thought that would be the most complicated of the cleanup amendments.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely, there's a lot to the conversation. I appreciated Danielle's comments with the background conversation that's going on. I definitely would like personally to see more food trucks in town, but then again, I also understand the plight of the struggling restaurant business owner. And, I think that there's a bigger conversation that needs to be had here.
I'd like to make more specific recommendations. Obviously, brick and mortar restaurants are expensive, and it's important to be sensitive to that. The other city I lived in earlier this year had a requirement where you weren't allowed to ever have a food truck open within, I'm going to make this up, but let's say like 500 feet or something of another brick and mortar business. And obviously that was also controversial, and someone should look up the actual number, and that's just an idea. But if the goal is to protect businesses, there are other ways to do that. The specific requirements or suggestions that I'd like to put forward are removing the paved surface requirement and just using whatever standard the farmer's market already has. Also removing the non-residential requirement. Until we get complaints, I'd like to just kind of see what innovations emerge from that. Also remove the one truck limit. I want a cupcake and I want a burger, but my friend doesn't like burgers, and we all want to be able to get food truck food at the same time. Also, consider exploring the use of street parking. If it's already permissible for private members of the public to use 200 square feet for 50 cents an hour, then a business should be able to do that as well. Also, if we do decide to come back to this later, I'd love to see more examples of how other communities have made food trucks a destination. I'm really excited to hear that the lumber company is interested in using their space for this. To say one more nice thing about Oakland, they have a museum with a public street that gets shut down every Friday evening and is filled with maybe 15 food trucks, and it's a destination upon itself. It happens to be surrounded by residential, multifamily residential on all sides. It's not a major commercial area by any means. And every first Friday, the museum's free and there's music and it's a whole thing. And I would love to see more Truckee-based food trucks. And the way to get more Truckee-based food trucks is to make more opportunities for people to have food trucks in Truckee. And I think we might see more Reno ones at first, but as people get accustomed to having more opportunities to attract customers and to follow the rules and operate in public, I think the more we'll see local businesses pop up in that form.
Excellent comments. We used to have this thing called Truckee Thursdays. What is what's the permitting process for food trucks right now? Do they have to come in and get a business license? How does that work?
We don't actually have a business license program in the town except for a couple choice, like taxi drivers and firearms, very specific requirements, but there isn't a requirement. They just have to go through Nevada County Environmental Health and make sure that they're safe and healthy.
Okay, and then so that would be the same thing for a Reno-based operation. Mm-hmm. So it would be interesting if we could have, while we're looking at this conversation, a way to incentivize local businesses, local food trucks, and try and promote that, and maybe, for lack of a better term, discourage, out-of-state vendors coming in.
If there's something specific in mind that you have, we can take a look at it, but I would say that our role as a local government, I think that's a difficult charge for us.
Fair enough. All right.
How is the food truck at the farmer's market handled, the 1 or 2 trucks they usually have there?
I believe that that's also either a special event permit or it's something that's just within the purview of the rec district as an agency.
Okay, so does that cover our food truck discussion?
What comes of this discussion?
I just want to quickly say that I love a lot of those points. I have similar things on here. Why only 1 per site if you can fit 2 or more without any impacts? And I can't help but think that there's areas that have businesses during the day that, like the tire place over on West River Street, that could completely benefit from something in the evening. And I think that's far enough from any of those restaurants that it wouldn't actually impact them. And again, that's also not a paved area. Some of those are unpaved. So I understand for, a siltation purposes that you want them paved, but I see these as, I see the reasons to not do it, so.
So what are we specifically proposing? Removing the addition of the 1 food truck per site, removing the non-residential use, removing the paved, basically other 3 things that were added, and then maybe coming back with some research about limiting distance to existing restaurants and allowing use of street parking?
Okay. I'm good with that.
I think I'm good with that, except the street parking. I just kind of think, how does that work? I guess if it's almost a non-issue if they have to be a certain distance from an existing restaurant, because I just think downtown, if a guy wants to park his food truck on
right in front of Bar of America would be awkward.
In the train station parking lot.
I think this is a great discussion, but Yumi did raise that we didn't notice it this way. So we're tabulating all of this for when we bring it back to you. So you can say what you want, but I think as part of your action, it's a bring it back.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And so this is an item that will come back to us, or does it go on to the town council? Like, it can't go on to the town council for them to deliberate these type of things?
Not the larger issue of whether or not we should expand our food trucks. For your recommendation to remove those 3 items that we're proposing, that can go forward as a recommendation, or we could just do it all at once.
Yeah, I mean, this would give us some time to figure out how the food trucks at the farmers market work, what kind of process they have for that. It allows us to talk to our engineering public works departments and parking about what if we use town right-of-way, what does that look like? Because there's oftentimes some safety concerns with that, which we've learned a little bit, again, with COVID and outdoor dining. So, kind of allowing us to package some additional information for you so that you can have a better informed decision to forward to the council.
Can I really quick ask you, has there been safety issues with the outdoor seating?
Yes, we had a toddler run out in the middle of the road, which we fixed, but we have had some safety issues. And going into winter, we are looking at putting K-rail along the edges of the businesses so that when we put the blades down to remove the snow, that it's only touching the K-rail and nothing else. So this is the logistics that we've been talking about and learning from with this. So it's been an educational process.
Yeah, so the street parking thing, I think the safety thing, that was in my mind too. I would like to just keep it prohibited from parking on the street at this point until we can really take a closer look at public safety.
It needs a closer look. I agree.
Okay, staff's that, you guys got that?
Yes, and
Okay.
I believe you covered all the cleanup items.
Great. Okay, now, okay.
Can I propose that the accessory uses and secondary residential units perhaps might be easy if we just decide to postpone that? Given the public comment we received asking for more time from a very relevant entity.
I think that we should have a discussion about what else we can get through tonight. And looking at, I think we can probably make some progress on the bicycle parking, but I think that we should probably, the ADU discussion should be postponed. Do we have?
Oh, that's fine. And some of this might be cleared up by the next town council meeting, correct?
That one item about short-term rentals, yes.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
That one item about prohibition of short-term rentals.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Okay, so that being said, let's move into bike parking, if that works for everybody. Okay. Who wants to start?
I think I was the only one who had issues with it. I got really into the weeds on it, and I don't understand. Yes, I would like to not lower the minimum to 2. I would like to keep the minimum at 3 where it currently is, or have it go up to 4. That's fine. I don't know how to reassess. So, okay. Earlier, when you made a suggestion, I said that was very elegant. I feel like this is not an elegant solution. Part of me is a little bit. I'm having a little bit of heartburn that we took something that was one line in the code and we made it into another 2 pages. If we could just, an option would be to, instead of saying 5% of the auto parking, you could up that to 20% of your auto parking. You need to have that many for bikes. I'm not sure why it's a completely different numbers. I wish that Emily was here to tell me where she came up with some of these.
So I think, Commissioner Tornay, that's an option that we have. If you want to bring this back, we can have Emily provide that background context. So that way you can see, what resources she used, sort of what other jurisdictions are doing. It sounds like you want that level of information, and then that will help you inform sort of your next steps on what you want to change. That if you feel like the hotel example is not appropriate for Truckee, then you can come up with something else based on what cities were used in the context of it.
Yeah, does that make sense to you guys?
Yes.
On some of these things, the 20 bike
Short of
parking
us going
spots.
through and just picking numbers.
Right. Okay, so then our recommendation is that we're going to postpone this one and have further clarification from planning.
Yeah, Danielle might want to talk about when these things could be brought back based on scheduling for future planning commission meetings.
Sounds great.
So as of right now, we think we have 3 items for October Planning Commission. So some of these would come back either to November, or if the commission felt strongly about continuing it to October, it could potentially bump projects, which isn't our typical practice. So usually we put development code amendments behind sort of project applications because they've been in the queue for a while. November would probably be the soonest that we would be able to bring back any of these modifications.
Are any of the applicants coming up for October, would they be affected by these revised bicycle parking requirements?
No, because their application's already deemed complete.
Right, they would be based on the development code that's in effect at the time their application was deemed complete, so. Oh, November's full? So maybe December, but I mean.
I don't have a problem waiting to December to talk about bike parking again.
And honestly, I think anything that's, just at that time of year, there's not a lot of projects coming forward. But I don't know. Yeah, I'm fine with.
My sense is that as a commission, you want to do it right. And so to do that, you want the additional context, which is what we want to provide for you.
Super. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, moving into planned developments. Who wants to jump in on this one, folks?
If I may, Chair.
Please.
Based off of our discussion, or my answering of questions, or lack of answering of questions, I would recommend removing the non-residential component, and then just moving the, changing the affordable housing percentage to 30%, and that would be the change, and then removing the two, silver and the cow green.
Yes. Okay, I'm getting a nodding head yes from Commissioner Tarnay.
I like all those things. I would like a little more information about the current needs of the community before setting an affordable housing target. I like 30. I would also like 50, but I want to come up with a number that's based on something a little more defensible and practical, so I don't just keep asking for larger numbers, just to be transparent about that. I'd also honestly like to see affordable housing be required of every project, in addition to one of the other, the public art, the transit stop. I'd like to see affordable housing just be a requirement.
We do have the 15% affordable housing is a requirement currently.
We do have our standard development code for residential projects. 15% of the units have to be affordable. This is just an additional 15% has to be inclusionary, has to be affordable to get your foot in the door of the plan development.
And the plan development then gives you the ability to get exceptions from other regulations.
Right, it's a great advantage. There's especially the report mentioned that we're down to developing some more difficult parcels, so having that streamlined process is very useful. I understand it's valuable, and so is affordable housing. So I thank you for clarifying all this. So currently, any project requires 15% affordability. If you're doing this discussed plan negotiation with the town, then you can either do an additional 15% or one of these other projects.
That's correct.
I would like to see it be, if you want to have this discussion, 30% plus another project. I'm asking for more.
Okay. So that's a discussion on the table with the rest of the Planning Commission.
What do y'all think?
I love it.
How do you define these community projects?
It is a pretty broad definition. It could be anything from a trail to a transit.
I just wanted to mention one thing on the planned developments. There are a broad variety of projects that can fall into a planned development or what could kick in a planned development request. So for example, you could have a project that just can't quite meet their on-site parking, for example. So they might come in with a planned development, and that might be their only deviation from the standard. So requiring something pretty stringent, just consider that when you're looking at these.
It's a high bar is what you're telling us.
But then it would come back to us, right? If they, is there some, where does the discretion fall in if they don't want to do 30% and they just need like 2 fewer parking spaces or something?
If you guys require this as a standard, then they have to meet that standard in order for the plan development to be approved for you guys to make the findings.
I just don't want to find us in a situation where we make it so hard to achieve a borderline project because of feasibility.
Yeah, I second that.
If I may, there is in my staff report, I did note that there was a larger discussion about plan development, including whether or not we should look at proportionality of the plan development public benefit versus the actual project, which is not something that we're proposing today, since that's kind of a more in-depth conversation that I couldn't wrap my head around yet. So that could be something that we incorporate as a part of a future discussion with the plan development.
And the other tool that the commission has is findings. So if we added some specific language that says the commission finds, for these reasons that they don't have to meet these specific mandatory features, then we could craft some wording for that, and that would be the out. It would have to be pretty specific, but, based on site constraints or, scale and scope of what's proposed or something, we could look at coming up with language for that.
I understand that we're trying to define a rule that fits a lot of very diverse projects. I like that approach. I'd rather accommodate the ones that are difficult instead of, frankly, like lowering the bar for everyone else. I can't see a transit stop being worth 15% affordable housing. Those are not equivalent projects in my mind.
I understand, and that's somewhat in your discretion when it does come in front of you. If someone says, I'm doing a public benefit, and this we think is equal to all the other project mandatory features. We also have a component within the findings of the plan development that allows for an exemption from the project mandatory features for smaller projects, like a 5-unit residential project, or I think it's something less than 10,000 square feet in commercial. I don't know if that's the exact number, but there is a threshold for smaller projects as long as they make findings that the project is good for the community in other ways.
Does that decision come to the planning commission or at staff level?
That's at the planning commission levels. It's still a plan development. It's just asking for other findings to exempt them from this mandatory feature.
I think one thing that would make me feel better about this is to get rid of transit shelter in there. It is not, I just don't see it as that significant. And for it to be public art, I think you need to put the word substantial directly in front of public art, because it would have to be a monumental size art, not just a very expensive tiny painting somewhere. So I don't know if that helps you at all. I did want to really quick mention some other things that I would love to see as options, like multiple street trees installed elsewhere in the town, or street trees and maintenance on that trees, or as an in lieu thing, maybe funding some public transportation would be an amazing option if that was an ongoing funding that could help get our headways down. Yes, or yeah, that's where I'm going with that. That's it. I just wanted to give some other options of things that I felt much more comfortable with than transit shelter. I feel like 10 street trees and their maintenance is much bigger than a bus bench.
And just to be clear, the plan development future discussion, I think we're thinking of bring back a new project mandatory feature in the future when we have an adopted climate action plan, where we have definitive ideas of what we think would actually help our community reduce greenhouse gas emissions or increase our sustainability options, including transit and sidewalks and things like that.
We're pretty far in the weeds here. What clear direction do we have to give?
I would propose we ask staff to come back to us with a version of this that has 30% affordable housing required for a planned unit development, within a nice menagerie of other options that people can choose from, with the expectation they select at least one of those, and then build in the flexibility if it's a very small project or if it's a very minor modification that's being requested for review, if they need an exit out of that discussion. Is that about where we're landing?
I think so.
What's the percentage now?
15.
25.
For a planned?
25%.
25, sorry.
So
yeah.
we're increasing it by 5%.
Yeah.
And just to, is there any interest, if I may, Chair,
Yes,
to
please.
just move forward with the cleanups to remove the 2 items that are not useful at the moment, the lead silver requirement?
Yes.
Okay.
Those are fine.
Yes, please.
Yes.
So the idea would be then we would move forward getting rid of those 2 items and then coming back with a new plan development discussion in the future.
Correct.
And then you were also clarifying that this affordable, if it's a for rent product, then it is for very low or low, and if it's a for sale, then it's moderate. You cannot have for rent for moderate income, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I love that. Thank you for putting that in there.
That wasn't so bad.
Yeah, okay, what does that leave us with, folks?
Did we punt the other 2?
I'm sorry?
Did we punt the other 2?
Yeah, so we're definitely moving the ADU, right? Down the road, and then, I'm sorry, which one else were we moving down the road?
Accessory uses and ADUs?
Well, do you think we can get through accessory dwelling? It didn't seem like that was too contentious. Susie definitely was hung up between.
Sorry, the ADUs or the accessory garage and buildings?
Accessory
Structure.
uses. We can talk about accessory uses.
That's the garages and structures. Got it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm so confused on that one.
This is the Olympics of Planning Commission.
Okay, but we're buying time from December right now. Keep that in mind.
So, but there was no other, well, no, Daniel still had an issue with the accessory uses because that 150 feet as well.
I think the 150, it doesn't really work. Like, I would just
And
like
I
to see.
did not do the math on that. I would love to see that on a whiteboard.
Like I said, if you have a 300 by 300 foot parcel that is 90,000 square feet, that's 2 acres. If you are in the very center of that parcel, you are 150 feet from the property line, which means there's not a single spot on that parcel that you could build any building. Now, you already have a house. You have to have a house on that property first before you can build a residential accessory structure. And so if you look at how big of a parcel you would need to be 150 feet from the property line to build an accessory structure, it becomes a
5 acre plus.
There's no one's going to allow to build one.
Right.
And
That's
how
why I
that,
think we should just stick with the standard setback. But I like the idea of setting a size limit so someone can't build a 30,000 square foot, what do you call it, agricultural structure?
so the way that worked before is that you could do it because it was only one side that was abutting other residences, right? So you could move it to the, is that how we were able to do that before? Or was it bigger than 2 acres?
No, the minor use permit process allowed pretty much unlimited flexibility to request larger structures.
But you said that you had one that you could move 150 feet away from.
Oh, there was one that we had a few months ago. I can't remember the size of the parcel. It was maybe 5 or 10 acres. It was a bigger parcel. So either you could apply the bigger setback to larger parcels or just take it out completely.
That was for
could we just make that double that setback to 60 feet instead of 150?
Cut it in half. What's the standard setback? So it's 30 or 50 feet?
30 if it's a larger parcel.
Yeah, I don't know why would just leave it with the standard setbacks.
Yeah, I think we just leave it the standard setbacks.
Okay.
Would be why tell people, why limit them so much on what they can do?
Right.
Is there any consideration for the 100-foot separation from the main dwelling, similar to the secondary residential units?
I don't think so. If someone has a 5 acre parcel.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it being more than 100 feet away. Okay.
The one we reviewed was the Snow Tech, right, in Tahoe Donna, where she's building that huge building.
I think it was actually one at the town council.
Yeah,
It was not here at the commission, it was at the town council.
It was a zoning administrator project that was appealed to town council.
Okay. Regardless, I think we're there on this one, correct? Yeah? All right. Okay, so then we're moving everything else down the road to December. Is that my understanding now? Holy smokes. All right.
Merry Christmas.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And with that being said, we are going into item 7 on the agenda, major review, which is none. And then item 8, staff reports, seeing none. Oh, Yumi, yes.
Before you go too far, we're going to go back to this item, and you're going to have to make a motion.
Of course we are. Thank you very much. Do I hear a motion on the floor?
Somebody needs to define how we're going to define this motion.
If I may, I can tell you what you've told me, and you could tell me if it's right. All right, we're going to continue the bicycle parking and support facilities in secondary residential units to the December Planning Commission meeting, potentially. For signs, we're going to make an amendment to add examples of the approvable and not approvable sign lighting. For workforce housing, we're going to forward a recommendation to open it up and do a more comprehensive look at the workforce housing requirements, but approve the changes as proposed. The kitchen, we're going to remove the number of sinks. The retaining walls, we're going to require a 6-foot maximum height limit unless a variance is requested and approved. For appeals, we're you're recommending to town council that we remove any person, or allow for any person to make an appeal. For food trucks, you're proposing to remove all of our changes and come back with new changes. For the plan development, you're proposing to come back and look at that more comprehensively, but to also, at this moment, to remove the two, the lead silver and the 30% Cal Green features and leave everything else the same. Is that correct?
And up it to 30%.
So would you like to move it up to 30% now, or would you like to wait?
I think we should wait until we have that other, yeah.
And then, do you want to remove the transit shelter example? Yes. Okay. And then for accessory structures, remove the 150-foot setback requirement. And that's all.
100-foot.
Yeah, the distance that accessory dwelling can be from the main residence.
That's part of the secondary residential unit that you'll look at in December.
Yeah, that was an ADU.
Thank you for that clarification. That's it in a nutshell. Do I hear a motion on the floor?
I'll make a motion to do all the stuff Yumi said.
Second.
Roll call vote?
Chair Gove,
Yes.
Vice Chair Tarnay,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller.
Yes.
Okay, and with that, we're moving on to public hearing, major review, none. So on to number 8, staff reports. No staff reports? No, okay. All right, information items.
Yes, so we are, excuse me, looking at the next 2 months of Planning Commission. We've got pretty much full agenda for both nights already. Couple questions on when a particular project may be heard, either October or November. So right now for October, we have your Teichert annual review. That is something that, for those of you that were here last year, you'll remember we're already back to that again. We have an appeal of a director decision for some fencing along Donner Lake. Those are two certainties. We possibly have a development project, but don't quite know yet. Then for November, we have the Crestwood construction project that's out on Industrial Way. And then we have Rayleigh's, they're coming in for some amendments to some signage. And then potentially a project out at Soaring Ranch, but again, not quite sure on that one yet. And then obviously for December, we'll be back with some code changes and potentially some other projects.
You do that really fast.
Thanks.
Do you have any questions? Sorry, ran through everything quickly. So we're keeping you busy for the next several months. Short story.
Is there any hint on what that development project that may or may not come in October?
Soaring Ranch, project out at Soaring Ranch. We're not sure yet on some of the last steps before that comes back to you.
Okay, you had said that under November, so that was the one.
It could be October or November, kind of depending where we land on it and kind of where the developer lands on it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yana. Okay. And then we're going to commission member reports. Susie, what you been up to?
Okay, August 19th, I attended a Zoom meeting about from the Friends of the Library about what they're trying to do with the new library. August 25th, sorry, did I say August? Yeah, August 25th, Town Council watched that. August 26th, I met with Zilka Pfluger to talk about Measure K. August 27th, I toured the TTSA wastewater treatment plant. So fun. You should totally go. And we spent about 4 hours there, which was amazing. Come to find out that, can I say this? Yes, Ruth came with us, and come to find out that Ruth has no sense of smell.
Are you a known carrier?
It is a congenital birth defect, no worries.
Which made that much more pleasant for her. Then went to watched the GPAC meeting after that on August 27th. August 28th, I met with Rolf Godon. He would really like to get some additional public transportation, school orientation, and school pickup September 1st. Let's see. I actually chatted with Sarah Coolidge from the PUD also about their relationship with the TTSA. September 8th, Town Council. And then I met with Christy Oriolis of Sierra Community House as well to find out what they do over there. Thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Susie. Commissioner Miller?
I also went on the wastewater tour and asked a lot of questions in all the rooms with the untreated water and just took my time because I was not in a rush to leave. I also attended a transit data symposium based in Toronto. Could have involved travel, obviously didn't this year. That was very sad, learning all about rural transit data. I spoke with Councilmember Klopstad about the GPAC. I attended the GPAC as our most recently appointed alternate. And I also published a letter in Moonshine Inc. about participating in the GPAC, which is awesome and everyone should try to do.
Good for you. Nice work. Commissioner Freeman, anything to report?
Less active, nothing to report.
I'm the same. Less active, nothing to report. And with that, we're adjourned.